down the road there were two local toffee shops. Ye Ancient Everton Toffee House and Mother Noblet's Toffee Shop were big fan favourites. Next, they say if you can't beat 'em, join 'em, and that's exactly what Ipswich Town did when it came to their nickname. The term Tractor Boys used to be chanted by their opponents as a way of putting the team down for their farming background. But during one game back in the late 90s, Ipswich were 1-0 up and they decided to flip the script. 1-0 to the Tractor Boys, they sang, and a new nickname was born. Let's head to Leicester, famous for more than just a red, well, orangey cheese and Jamie Vardy. Leicestershire's also the birthplace of fox hunting, hence the Foxes. Next up, turns out apples are not the only fruit that don't fall far from the tree. Bournemouth's nickname, the Cherries, comes from the fact the club's stadium was originally built right next to a bunch of cherry orchards. This next story actually involves two club nicknames. It started with Crystal Palace. They were having an absolute nightmare run back in the early 70s. They'd been relegated after a terrible spell and manager Malcolm Allison decided enough was enough. He wanted a new nickname, something strong, fast and destined for success. Something exactly like an eagle. But there's more to this one. Brighton were in search of a nickname too, and Palace finally gave them what they needed. In a heated match between the two back in 1976, Palace fans began chanting, "Eagles, Eagles," and some clever Brighton fans came up with the perfect reply, "Seagulls, Seagulls." Not all club nicknames have a crazy story though. Take the Gunners. That just comes from the fact a group of munitions workers in the Royal Arsenal factory in Woolwich set up the club in 1886. On the flip side, some nicknames seem simple, but there's a bit more to them, like West Ham. The Hammers is actually nothing to do with the ham part of the name. It comes from the fact the club used to be called Thames Ironworks FC and was made up of workmen and shipbuilders. So next time the away end's chanting their crazy nickname, you'll now know exactly where it came from.
Yeah, good evening everybody and welcome to your traditional Sunday night injection of football from across the continent of Europe and beyond. Of course, it's Trans-Europe Express. I'm Danny Kelly, with me for the next 3 hours, hopefully yourselves, and of course Andy Brassell, without whom the show would be, well, just be me chuntering on. Nobody wants to hear that. Loads of stuff for you in the course of the next 180 minutes. We'll have all the major stories from across the continent as club football resumes following the World Cup qualifiers. Protests from the players in Spain about that fixture that's been arranged in Miami. Amazing story. We'll talk about that first here tonight. We'll preview everything that's going on in the Champions League, the Europa League and the Europa Conference League, all of which return this week for the first time really this season, isn't that they're all one after the other, now that we're into the proper league stages. We'll have Mbappé watch. Tim Vickery will join us from South America. And we'll have a special guest for you, Lorenzo Bertoni, Italian. He's the editor of Football Italia. He's at tonight's big game between AC Milan and Fiorentina. He'll be reporting live from the San Siro. Much else besides. Should be a belting 3 hours. Thanks for joining us here on Trans-Europe Express on talkSPORT. Good evening, Andy.
Good evening, Danny. How are you?
Really, really good and really looking forward to the next 3 hours. But I want to start with a story. I guess it's fair to say that over the past two and a half years, we've been saying as the authorities introduced more tournaments, lengthier tournaments, more geographically diverse tournaments, and all apparently in order to assuage the gods of television and mammon, that sooner or later the players are going to have to be the ones who dig their heels in. and say, sorry, this is all too much. Interesting that the first sign of this really happening, other than press conferences in which people like Rodri and Son Heung-min have actually brought it up, was this weekend in Spain. Now, following UEFA's apparently, inverted commas, reluctant decision to allow the game between, I think, Villarreal and Barcelona to be in Miami next season, all of the footballers did something extraordinary in Spain this weekend. Why don't you explain exactly what they did? Because it's very hard to see it on television.
Yeah, they did, Danny. So starting with the fixture between Oviedo and Espanyol on Friday night that opened the La Liga weekend, all the players refused to play for the first 15 seconds of game. So the whistle went, the ball came off the centre spot, and then nothing happened. Players just stood there, and the fans applauded. So it was an incredibly strong message to be sent from players at all levels in La Liga. And in many cases, not shown, of course, because La Liga weren't going to promote this message themselves. It was something coming from the players. Obviously, something that the league want to do is to diversify, is to have some activation opportunities, etc., and play this game away in Miami. The players are not on board, and if there was something that was going to be done, it was going to be, as you say, from the players rather than the supporters, because the supporters in Spain for years, and we've spoken about it the whole time we've been doing this show, as you said, Danny, they are treated like doormats time and time again, with late changes to times, dates, kick-off times, all sorts of stuff like that. And so it was going to take the players to say something, and this is what's happened. Although with the World League obviously coming from La Liga, that has its own in-house production company, much like the Premier League has, with Premier League Productions, in many cases, the player standing there and not doing anything for 15 seconds wasn't shown. You had an aerial shot of the stadium taken by drone instead.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I think it's important that people like us mention this, because otherwise the protest, which I think is very significant. Now, whether it will be effective, we've yet to see, but it's significant that the players and that the crowd, who have paid good money to watch a football match, applauded 22 men, and it was men in this case, standing around doing nothing.
Yes.
Because it shows that there is a unity between the players and the fans. It's not been the outrage that accompanied the Super League for obvious reasons, but it is amazing to think that's what they did. Now, the question is, Andy, whether this will be a one-off and become remembered as a historic but meaningless gesture, or how far the players are prepared to go, because UEFA, whose word I have to be honest I wouldn't trust, have said these two fixtures are one-off, and the contract's already been signed and all the rest of it. That word salad in that extraordinary document they put out, for those who weren't listening last week, which started with the headline, "We are absolutely opposed to European games being played outside of Europe," and then went on, first paragraph, say, "But we have allowed these two." I don't know. Do you think this will spread, Andy? And if so, is the important thing here to close it down completely? Because Spain, as you say, already had an easy target, because the fans are used to being pushed about a bit more than, say, in Germany or England. But equally, they do have things like their sort of Super Cup are taking part in the Middle East.
Yeah, that's right. And I think this is why it always seemed like Spain was open for it, where there would be less supporter resistance, where you have precedent, just as you have in Italy. Of course, you've got 25 years of Super Cups being played abroad there, and the equivalent being given a long-term deal to be played in Saudi Arabia in Spain, going back a couple of years. So it would feel like this is the thin end of the wedge. I think if this sort of thing, this is never going to happen with Bundesliga football. We just know that. That's a given. You couldn't find any director, board member, commercial partner, capitalist enough to say, let's go and take a Bundesliga game to the United States or Australia. It just wouldn't happen. That they know what the reaction would be. This is interesting because it's player led. I think we expect something like this to be fan led, of course, but for it to be player led, and the players who came out and spoke about it first. So you think of Frenkie de Jong at Barcelona. You think of Adrien Rabiot at Milan, and of course backed up by Mike Maignan, his international teammate and his Milan teammate when he was on international duty. For them to come out and say something was big. Now, if this turns from a grumble into a movement, then it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we should add that Real Madrid have complained bitterly about it in public, saying that it destroys the integrity of the Spanish league for that season. Mm-hmm. I suppose they would do that, wouldn't they? Because anything Barcelona are involved with, they're automatically against. But Hansi Flick himself has said twice in press conferences that he's not sure it's a great idea, even though he's liable as the manager of Barcelona to be very much involved. What struck me, Andy, was that the players are not known for being organised. You know, they do their business through their agents, and you know, beyond the boundaries of their own training sessions and their own team, they often appear to me to be a little bit blind to what's going on here, there, and everywhere. But for them all to do it suggests a degree of organisation and indeed unity.
Yeah, and this is where FIFPro comes in, the International Players Union, I think. And I think it's clear that, you know, if we're talking about La Liga, we talked about it starting at Oviedo versus Espanyol on Friday night. The concerns, both on a labour and financial level of a player from Oviedo couldn't be more different from a Real Madrid player. But
Sure.
If you're talking about a Barcelona and a Milan player, you're talking about a similar pool of talent and a similar lifestyle concerns and fitness and health, both mental and physical concerns. So I think for FIFPro to come in and have its word on this, and it already has really, you know, with the new international break as well, and we might come back to that a bit later because what Max Allegri had to say on that this week was really, really interesting, when a lot of the Italian media were absolutely frothing about the injuries picked up on international duty by players like Rabiot, for example. I think for FIFPro to come out and really corral leading players from every country into backing this effort, I think that's an interesting thing. And if it's not going to spread, if, say, other leagues, we already talked about Germany, but I think particularly the Premier League and France, to have a look at it and think, no, it's not worth the bother, that will be what puts a stop to it, I think. And, you know, it's all about them being pressured by their members, which are the players.
Yeah, really a fascinating weekend in Spain. And it's amazing. We all know from radio, Andy, 15 seconds sounds like nothing, doesn't it? But actually 15 seconds of nothing happening on a football pitch is an eternity, you know? And
exactly.
I was a little amazed that one of the Pipsqueak referees didn't book them all for time wasting, but that's another story. Listen, we've got a poll for you tonight. Why don't I tell you about that and before we go over to the Grand Prix of America, which is in full swing right now. Our poll, which is on X/Twitter, is who will finish top scorer in this season's Champions League. And this really is a delicious lineup of possibilities. The four names we've picked, they're obvious, aren't they? Harry Kane. More about him in just a few seconds here on Trans-Europe Express. Kylian Mbappé, Erling Haaland, or the recently elected Ballon d'Or winner, Ousmane Dembele. Which of those four great strikers, three of whom are in monstrous form already this season, will be the leading goal scorer when we get to the end of the Champions League? I say go to X/Twitter and vote. You can vote at talkSPORT, at Danny Kelly Words, or at Andy Brassell, 2 S's and 2 L's. Vote in that poll of who will be the top scorer in the Champions League this season. Meanwhile, as I say, live sport continues. We'll get the latest from Andy in a few seconds' time on all of the football games that are still going on in France, Spain and Italy. But first, let's get to the very latest from the Grand Prix of America, taking part at the beautifully named Circuit of the Americas in Austin. Here's Tom Clayton.
It's lap number 42 of the USA Grand Prix. Max Verstappen holds a 7-second lead. Now, after all of the pit stops have shaken out, Charles Leclerc appears to have played an absolute masterstroke, switching on to the longer-lasting tyres slightly earlier into this Grand Prix, and no one can catch him, no one can get past him. Lando Norris, try as he might, is in third place. He caught up to the back of him, but his softer, lesser-lasting tyres are not doing the business to get him in front. Max Verstappen has been told to manage his tyres. He's got a comfortable, as I say, around 7-second lead, but at this stage, you can't see anyone catching him. It looks like his race to lose. 13 laps remaining.
Thanks very much, Tom. We'll get more from Tom as those 13 laps unfold. And we'll have a quick breakdown when we come back. Andy will give us the latest from Getafe, Milan and Nantes. And we'll be talking about, the Klassiker in Germany and another quite extraordinary performance. No, we won't. We'll be talking, yes, we will be talking about the Klassiker in Germany and another extraordinary performance in about 8 different positions by the England captain. Yeah, welcome back to Trans-Europe Express with me, Danny Kelly, and Andy Brassell is also very much with us. Andy, why don't you give us the latest from the games in Spain, Italy and France as they head towards their finish, indeed, if they are still going on?
Yeah, so we're going to start with the one in Italy. Milan have equalised. It's Milan 1, Fiorentina 1. Fiorentina still with a win in Serie A this season. They took the lead in a smash and grab style. Robin Gosens with just their second shot, scoring and putting them in front 10 minutes into the second half. Rafael Leao, on his first start of the season, has equalised. If Milan win that game, by the way, they go top of Serie A, so that's one to watch. In Madrid, or in the suburbs of Madrid, it's after an hour, Getafe 0, Real Madrid 0. A lot of injuries for Real Madrid at the moment, meaning David Alaba started that game, but he did go off at half-time to be replaced by Raul Asensio. They've just brought on Vinicius Junior off the substitutes bench as well. 7 shots on target for Real Madrid, none for Getafe, but not a goal yet. Lille, meanwhile, Olivier Giroud has just gone off, but they continue to lead 1-0 at Nantes. Early goal for them there that put them in front.
Yeah, let me remind you that a little later on, when that game finishes in Italy, we'll be going live to Milan to join Lorenzo Bettoni, editor of Football Italia, to talk about that game and much else going on in Italy. In the meanwhile, Andy, it was the Klassiker in Germany, Bayern Munich against Dortmund. And it was a really weird game because for 45 minutes, Bayern Munich played like they were playing against a bunch of kids in a school playground. Much more competitive, I guess, in the second half before Bayern ran out 2-1 winners.
Yeah, and I think it's easy to say, one of our favourite cliches, isn't it? A game of two halves. A sneak preview of my Guardian column for tomorrow, hashtag tomorrow's papers today. I would say that it was more a game of one half, because the first half wasn't really a proper match. It was just Bayern absolutely battering a defending Dortmund. Dortmund ended that first half with an XG, and whether you're a fan of XG or not, this number tells its own story. An XG of 0.0. That's where Dortmund were. They just couldn't get out at all. Now, look, there's a lot to say for Bayern. Of course, Harry Kane was excellent. Luis Diaz, again, was excellent. When he arrived in Germany, people were twitching about a player of that age having that much money spent on him, even though to me and maybe to us, as an English-based football community, it seemed like a reasonable figure, both for Liverpool to charge and for Bayern to pay. But less and less people are talking about that now, because Diaz has been fantastic. They're a bit clumsy in front of goal, I thought, Bayern. And Kane spoke about it afterwards, said we should have been 3 or 4-0 up at half-time, and he's absolutely right. It was completely different after the break, and Dortmund came back strongly, and I think underlined how good a coach Niko Kovac is, but not just that, how good a coach Niko Kovac is for them and the difference he's made to them since he's been there. Now, look, Dortmund shouldn't have an inferiority complex at Bayern. The last 2 visits before this, they'd not got thwacked. They'd drawn one and won one, which is pretty remarkable, because we think of the Allianz Arena being their house of horrors, where they go and get flamed. They could have easily got a draw out of this. And if it wasn't for a really strange winning goal, which was a quite unhappy moment for Joe Bellingham, finished off by Michael Elise, though quite how much he knew about that, I think is open to question, then Dortmund could have easily gone home with a point.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about the actual game, but the central figure in the game, and I think, Andy, there's been a danger over the years that in this country, certainly in England, we've become Harry Kane blind, partially because of club tribalism. But I've known from watching him for the best part of a decade that not only is the outstanding striker, perhaps English striker of the last 25 years, but he is a brilliant all-round player. And as he has got older, he's got better and better at that. And this may have been the culmination of all that. I don't want to overdo it, but he was sensational, coming back towards his own goal and playing as a midfielder. Indeed, afterwards, he bigged himself up slightly, didn't he?
Yeah, he said he was asked by Archie Rintert from ESPN, "What was your role today? You were like a midfielder," and he said, "Yes, I was a midfielder. I was a 6, an 8, and a 10," and I think that's right. And the amount of defensive work that he did in open play, I thought was really, really noteworthy.
We're used to him heading the ball away from corners, but yeah, in open play,
yes.
yeah.
And there's a couple of reasons for this, I think. The first one being that since moving to Bayern, obviously he was sometimes criticised, but particularly by a section of England fans for dropping deep when he should have been in the penalty box, just gobbling up the goals. But in fact, at Bayern, the sense has been because he's such a great passer and because the wingers are so quicksilver that he can do both. And that he creates, especially when you've got goal-scoring winger like Luis Diaz now, that you drop and play that pass. And Luis Diaz is going to score a ton of goals this season. Even if he plays out wide left all season, he will score a ton of goals. Just because of the way that Kane can find him consistently, just like the way that Kane found him in the build-up to that goal where Joe Bellingham got it stuck under his feet, tried to get it away and smashed it straight into Elise, and that turned into what eventually was the winning goal after Julian Brandt pulled one back. But I think as well, managing the aging process, as you said, is a huge part of it with Kane, because having those skills is one thing, but having the vision and I think the lack of ego to realise that actually I can't be this same player forever. I'm going to have to find a way to change. And really, Bayern is a great environment for him to be able to do that, I think. And I think the fact that he forged a close relationship with Thomas Müller on and off the field from the very start, I think possibly helped him in that. But I guess it's like when you see super athletic NBA players, you think, okay, you're not going to be able to do that when you're 35, 36. Now, we look at Kane, and we talked about Luis Diaz there and what a panic, not just Bayern, but German football society was in the fact that all this money had been paid for a player who was heading towards 30 rapidly. That was even more so when Kane arrived. But the reason that's thought about less and less now is because he has mapped a clear route to the fact that he can play until he's 35, 36 at a good level. It feels like that now. Rather than a possibility, it feels like a probability because of what he's showing all the time. I don't think it's an exaggeration, actually, to say it feels a little bit like 2015 Messi, when in the Champions League final out in Berlin, where they beat Juventus and beat Juventus well, he plays really deep in that game and he kind of maps where he can go in the future. And this, rather than Kane enjoying his last one or two great years, I think he's got quite a few great years to go. And I think the evidence in favour of that is really stacking up.
And after those passes endlessly towards Luis Diaz playing out on the wide left, I can imagine Diaz ringing Son Heung-min and saying, down the phone, "Oh, I get it now. If I just make that run, towards the edge of the corner of the penalty area, the ball will arrive in stride." 9 times out of 10. I had the pleasure of watching it for a decade, as I say. The Bayern Munich fans are now getting to see it. Should make the point, of course, that he is still a goal scorer. He got a goal there. His 400th goal in club football. Take away the mountainous pile of goals he's accruing playing for England. He has scored for Norwich, Leicester, Millwall, Tottenham and Bayern Munich. I'm not sure that he got any in one of his loan periods. Between
none for Leyton Orient.
No, none for the Orient. That's right.
Also, Danny, like those of you who are watching on YouTube will see me doing the Memphis Depay and putting my fingers in my ears at the moment, because, as you know, I consider it incredibly vulgar describing Harry Kane just by numbers. He's so much better than that.
Well, I still think the number 400 deserves to be mentioned, as he,
Okay.
Yeah, and Andy, enough. Those for the vast millions of you watching on smart TVs and YouTube, Andy is literally putting his fingers in his ears, which is very good indeed. The thing about that pile of goals is that he's actually accelerating the rate at which he's getting them there in the Bundesliga. Andy, one last thing about the game. Another Englishman. You're right to say that the brilliance of Kane's performance shouldn't be overshadowed by the absolute rick that Joe Bellingham did for what turned out to be the winning goal.
Yeah, and it was very unfortunate. Now, look, the passing move by Kane and Diaz was brilliant. But when the ball came in from Diaz, it went past Gregor Kobel, the goalkeeper, and Joe Bellingham looked like he'd lost his footing, looked like he'd regained it, and then he hesitated long enough that Elise was allowed to close him down. And when Joe went to clear it, it hit Elise and went straight in, as we spoke about before. Look, it was really unfortunate, but I guess just the optics of it, especially after he's had quite a slow start, It felt a little bit rabbit in the headlights. Now, look, you could say that about any of Dortmund's players in that first half, where they were just stuck really in their own half, like so many teams have been at the Allianz Arena before. And I think a lot will be this season because, you know, when we talk about Champions League favourites, a lot of people don't talk about Bayern. Why not? They really should be. They really, really should be.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for that. And don't forget, you can go and vote in our poll now on Twitter if you think that Harry Kane will be the leading goal scorer in the Champions League. We'll be previewing some very big Champions League games a little later in the programme. But next, we'll be turning our attention to the rest of the football in Germany this weekend, which includes the most Andy Brassell headline of all time. Well, yeah, we are in the Queen's English, except this headline is in kind of guttural German. The headline for what's been going on in the Bundesliga is Sebastian is der beste Mann. Now, Andy, you wrote this headline, and I think it's one of your most snaky and Byzantine ever. Explain what Sebastian is der best man refers to.
Well, look, in the good old days, a couple of years ago, when Uli Hoeneß had just been released from prison for tax evasion, you come off the tube at Frutmanning, the U-Bahn at Frutmanning, and walk up the stairs towards the Allianz Arena, and there are these little stalls that sell Bayern memorabilia, knockoff Bayern memorabilia on the way to the stadium. And one of them was a scarf which had Uli Hoeneß's face on, and it said, Uli, du bist the beste man. To say, look, you're our guy. You're our guy. Even though you went to prison, you're still our guy. Well, you know what? His nephew, Sebastian Hoeneß, could perhaps be the real best man, because I think he's the best coach in the Bundesliga. Now, bear in mind, he's the head coach of Stuttgart. He has been for a few years now. In that time, he took over a completely hopeless team, steered them away from relegation. Next season, got them into second, and they would have won the league in a normal season, but they were behind that unbeaten Bayer Leverkusen, so they finished second in that season. After losing their three best players at the start of the season, then fast forward to them losing their two best players, who Dortmund nicked at the start of last season. They still finished halfway up and won the DFB Pokal and, punched their weight in the Champions League. They were a little unlucky not to make the top 24. And then this season, of course, they lost Nick Woltemade far too late to replace him in the transfer window. They won 3-0 at Wolfsburg yesterday, despite not having a striker of real repute. Some would argue, although Thiago Tomas has gone back there from Wolfsburg. He scored, of course, and then didn't celebrate. But they are third place in the Bundesliga. They're doing well in Europe. Of course, they're in the Europa League, having won the Cup. There is nothing this guy can't do, and they do it all with front foot football, with these complete delusions of grandeur that they can kind of back up as well. I think there's no doubt about the fact that, not just because of the family link, but partly because of the family link, obviously, he will end up as a Bayern coach at some point, and he'll do a brilliant job of it.
Wow. I mean, clearly he has got loads and loads of talent. As you say, that 3-0 victory over Wolfsburg put them into third place. Once again, challenging for the Champions League places, if not the actual title in Germany. The other team who will have been watching, Andy, the Klassiker with great interest, because it affected where they might be finishing at the weekend, were Leipzig. Now, they were playing Hamburg, who most of us thought would be whipping boys this season. They did okay, Hamburg, but Leipzig found a way to go second, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. And Hamburg have been far better than I expected them to be, because I expected really nothing from them. And they made it tough for Leipzig. But yeah, as you say, with Dortmund likely to lose points in Munich, Leipzig had to take advantage of that. And they played really well in the first half. 2 goals from Christoph Baumgartner, either side of half-time. He's really in form at the moment. 3 in the last 2 for him, the Austrian attacking midfielder, and I really like him. But they came back, Hamburg. They made a decent fist of it. Albert Sabila-Congo, of course, is on loan from Arsenal. He scored their goal, or it was credited to him anyway. And they were knocking on the door in the last little bit. So for Leipzig to find a way to hang on when they weren't having their best day, I think was a really worthwhile exercise.
Which then takes us on to Bayer Leverkusen. Now, look, they are constantly under the microscope, because following their, extraordinary victory 2 years ago in the race for the Bundesliga title, they've undergone an almost complete change of team. Lost their manager, of course, but they've also, sold 2/3 of the team that did win the title. And I have to say, they won 4-3 at Mainz, which is good. They won the game, but that is not the kind of performance we're used to them. Mainz have been terrible so far at home, haven't they?
Yeah, I mean, in any normal universe, the way they attacked in this game, Leverkusen win this game 4-1. Mainz, of course, as you say, hadn't scored a home goal up until this point this season. They helped themselves to 3, or were helped to 3, depending on which way you look at it, because Leverkusen defended shambolically. Now, look, I think they'll be all right in the end, because Gerald Quance is a good player. We know that. Like, Bade is close to getting in the French national team and has been in the squad. I think is good, and he'll be okay as well. but it's taking time, and it's interesting that a couple of the old heads are leading them through it. So you look at Alex Ronaldo, scored a couple, not even a free kick in sight, but scored a couple, and he was brilliant. You had Jonas Hoffmann, who had an assist for one of those coming back. He couldn't get a game off Xabi Alonso, and he was desperate to leave. He has had a sort of second wind, and I think one of the smartest things that Kasper Hjulmand had, knowing he can't change everything overnight, knowing he can't make this team gel overnight, is just getting an experienced player in there to kind of do some of that work for him. And Martin Terrier, who's been out with an ACL for the best part of a year, scored what proved to be the eventual winner. I mean, he did do his best to miss it. He took a complete air shot at it first time, and it was one of those things that everyone moved to block it and got out the way for the actual shot that he took that went in afterwards as well, which was quite amusing.
Listen, Andy, we'll get our stars of the week in Germany in just a second, but the Grand Prix of America there in Austin, Texas has finished. The checkered flag has fallen. How's it finished? Tom Clayton.
It's finished pretty much exactly as we're expecting. Max Verstappen wins by a pretty imperious margin of 8 seconds. There was a really good battle in the last few laps between Lando Norris and Charles Leclerc, with the McLaren driver coming out in second place. Leclerc finishes third. Lewis Hamilton finished a lonely fourth place, and championship leader Oscar Piastri was fifth. That means the gap at the top of the table, with just 5 rounds to go. Lando Norris is behind by 17 points. Max Verstappen behind by 40 points, 5 races left. This is going to be a thrilling end to what's been a great F1 season.
Thank you very much indeed, Tom. And Tom, we'll keep you up to date with all that goes on as that very close race now, but particularly by the standards of recent years, for the F1 Drivers' Championship, because constructors already won, will be going down, well, to the wire, it looks like. And Tom Clayton and his colleagues here at talkSPORT will keep you up to date with that. Speaking of up to date, Andy, before we do the stars of the week, can you give us the latest from the games that are still going on across Europe?
Yeah, I can. It's full time in France. It's Nantes 0, Lille 2. Hakan Haraldsson, I should have said earlier, scored the first goal for Lille. Second one by just left Rangers. Hamza Igamani just piled through and smashed it in the corner to clinch the points. I don't think that'll make Rangers fans feel any better after the last little while that they've had. But nevertheless, that is the fact of the matter.
The Celtic results today might cheer them up, though.
Yeah, possibly. Still in stoppage time. Milan looked like they're going top. 2-1 up. Rafael Leao with both goals. Second one from the penalty spot. He was trying to take his shirt off to celebrate. All his teammates jumped on top of him and stopped him from taking it off. And a lot going on in Madrid as well. Bit of a dust-up on the touchline between Jose Bordalas, the coach of Getafe, and Jude Bellingham, who was having, Jude Bellingham words with him. This was our Alan Neon was sent off for elbowing the former West Brom player. And directly after that, Kylian Mbappé has scored for the 11th successive game. So it is 1-0 to Real Madrid.
That one's not quite finished either. Listen, thank you very, very much indeed. Who's your star of the week in Germany, Andy?
Vincenzo Grifo, everyone's favourite set-piece seeker, was left out the team against Eintracht Frankfurt. They started well, Freiburg, then went 2-1 down. He came on late on, and as soon as they got a free kick 25 yards out, you knew what was happening. He smashed it in the corner and they got themselves a point.
Yeah, we talked about the defeat. My star of the week is somebody who was on the losing side. But Yusuf Poulsen turned out for Hamburg against Leipzig today. Now, just think about that, because Yusuf Poulsen is the all-time appearance maker for Leipzig, a relatively new club, of course, but he managed to spend 12 years there, virtually all the time the club's been in existence. Played for them in 3 separate divisions as they made their, let's be honest, well-financed way through the leagues. He got 95 goals over that 12 years for RB Leipzig, and he was sold in the summer to Hamburg. So a return for him to his old club. He is their record appearance maker ever, and he's my star of the week. For that, when we come back, the final whistle will have gone in Milan, and Lorenzo Bettoni, editor of Football Italia, will join us to talk about that and much else besides, including an amazing result from Como today. You're listening to Trans Europe Express. Yeah, let's talk next here on Trans Europe Express about Italy. And the final whistle, Andy, as you said, has gone in the game between Milan and Fiorentina. The final score, AC Milan 2, Fiorentina 1. That takes the Milanese back to the top of Serie A, replacing their city rivals Inter. I'm delighted to say that Lorenzo Bettoni, Italian football expert and indeed editor of Football Italia, is joining us now from outside or inside the San Siro. I'm not sure which. Hello, Lorenzo.
Hello, it's still inside.
Still inside what must be a very, very happy San Siro. Tell us about the match.
Yeah, indeed, very happy Milan fans. As you said, they're now back into the top spot in Serie A. But it wasn't an easy game for them because they went down with a goal from Robin Gosens at minute 55. And it was a difficult game for Milan from the very beginning because they came into this match without many key players, especially Christian Pulisic and Adrian Rabiot. Pervis Estupiñán was also injured. Ruben Loftus-Cheek picked up an injury basically last night, and Christopher Nkunku was also eventually ruled out of this game. This means Milan only had 7 players on the bench, and actually the only senior players, except for second choice keeper Terracciano, Conny De Winter, and Santiago Gimenez. So from the very beginning, it was meant to be a difficult game for Milan. They went down, but then Rafael Leao's brace, first minute 63, shot from outside the box, and then minute 86, penalty kick. There's going to be a lot of noise about this penalty kick because it's debatable, at least, the way he was given with a VAR check. But in the end, it was given, and Leao scored it to make it 2-1. An interesting thing about the Leao game and the Leao goal, these were his first goals in a home game for Milan since May 2024. He had not scored a home game for 17 months. Yeah.
So, Lorenzo, you talked about injuries, which I suppose that's at least part of what gave Rafael Leao his chance to start his first game of the season. How much of a strong signal was it in the pre-match press conference before this game on Friday, where all the journalists asked him about players not really been looked after, which is kind of a running theme across Europe by their international coaches or by their federations, the injuries suffered by Rabiot and the others, Pulisic particularly. And Allegri just said, no, let's not talk about that. Let's deal with the reality. Let's deal with what we've actually got and get on with it. How much of a sign was that to the dressing room?
Yeah, I mean, this is pure Massimiliano Allegri. I mean, those who've been following him at Juventus as well over the years know that he's not a coach who complains about the injuries. He's not a coach who complains about lack of signings or players leaving. He deals with what he has. And perhaps behind the scenes he complains. For sure he's not he's one of the top coaches, so for sure he has some sort of demands, and he wants the club to be respected, and for sure he was not happy with all these injuries. But the signals that it gives the team and that it gives to the outside environment is these players are out anyway. They're injured, so there's no point, discussing about this or getting angry or having bad feelings about this, because it's not going to help us through the game. What will help us is focus on the match, is focus on the players that we have, take out our motivation, and try to perform in the best way. Again, it was not an easy game, but it was a game that you would expect from Milan in such circumstances. And the mentality that they're growing into, it's, of course, very much given by Allegri. And let me mention Luka Modric, because aside from his quality, the way he runs behind the opponents, the way he recovers the ball, the amount of possession, the amount of time he recovers possession, it's really something out of this world for a player who is 40 at this level. And really, we were talking about Milan fans being really happy, they're purely in love with Luka Modric.
Lorenzo, at the start of the season, I don't think many people would have had Milan down as likely champions in Italy. but they're top now. Do you see them as genuine contenders for the Scudetto?
Well, at this point, yeah, I know it's early because it's just 7 games, but the pathway they've taken, it's pretty good. I mean, they've just only lost the first game. They've been consistent in their performances. They still haven't had. Basically, this was the first game that Leao started this season in Serie A because of an injury that he suffered in August. So there's still plenty of room for improvement for Milan. Like Napoli last season, they won't be playing any European competition this term, and we all know how demanding it is to play 3 games per week. And we saw with Napoli last season that it can make a big difference. So I would say absolutely yes, and especially because to me, Napoli, they are the main favorite to win the title, but they're having a few issues. They have some players out. They still haven't found the right balance, especially in central midfield with Kevin De Bruyne and Scott McTominay. And so there's room for an exciting title race, I think, and Milan will be part of it.
Of course, that is what Italy does best, exciting title races in modern European football, Lorenzo. But with that in mind, I wanted to ask you about Juventus, who a lot of people who thought would be contenders. They lost the early game away at Como today, who again were inspired by Nicolás, who was brilliant. He created one, he scored one. But Igor Tudor getting into it with the journalists afterwards and saying he was unhappy with the criticism of their performances. But when you think about the flurry of goals that Juventus scored in the early part of the season, and now they've scored, 4 in the last 5, they've got all this attacking talent, and he can't get a tune out of it. And this surely has to threaten his job.
Yeah, I mean, that's a paradox at Juventus. I can't remember them having so many attacking options over the last few years. This year they have quite a few names up front that they can use. Yet Tudor actually hasn't been able to create what it takes to have a constant threat up front, and this is clearly down to the coach, because when you have the players at your disposal and the talent at your disposal, then you have to make the most out of it. It has to be said that he's dealing with the situation, especially with Dusan Vlahovic, which is not necessarily an easy one, because Vlahovic has his contract expiring in June 2026. I mean, I wouldn't say he's not part of the plans, but there is, of course, whenever it comes to choosing the lineup, there is a decision that he makes based on the fact that he's not going to be at Juventus at this point of the year next year. So he's going to leave either in January or over the summer, because he's not going to renew his contract. And so it's a difficult situation, because he's the best scorer that Juventus have, with 4 goals scored so far this season, all as a substitute. He's probably the most proven goal scorer they have, even if they have Jonathan David, who joined from Lille this summer as a free agent. It doesn't have Serie A experience, and so it's natural, to perhaps give more trust to Vlahovic, but it's not something that he can do right now, because again, he's not a player who's going to be around for long. So it's not even an easy situation for Tudor, but at the same time, he has the options up there to do more. And tonight, today we saw an attacking player in Como, in Nico Paz, who's really special. And there were rumors he could go to Tottenham this summer. Then, of course, Real Madrid have an option to resign him. But this kid is really special.
Listen, Lorenzo, thank you so much for giving us all that information and enlightenment. Lorenzo Bettoni there, as I say, editor of Football Italia, reporting live from the San Siro. And as he mentioned there, the star of Como's 2-0 win over Juventus was Nico Paz. He got a goal and assist. So far, Como this season has scored 9. He has been a scorer or assister of 8 of those. Let's do our stars of the week, Andy. I'm going to pick Ange-Johan Bonni, standing in for Marcus Thuram while he's injured for Inter. He got the goal against Roma, the single goal away in Rome that put them temporarily on top till they were replaced, as you just heard, by their city rivals. And Johan Bonney is my star of the week. Who is yours?
My star of the week is perhaps inevitably Gio Simeone. He seems to be getting it every week at the moment. He's already scored against Roma, against Lazio. Inevitably, he was going to score against his former club, Napoli, yesterday for Torino. Brilliant goal, which turned out to be the winner. And do you know what? It's a very, very convincing and sincere non-celebration as well.
Listen, thank you very, very much indeed for that. That first hour has flown by. We've got lots to get through in the second hour, including we'll be looking forward to the return of the Champions League on Tuesday and Wednesday. Still, as you know, 6 English clubs involved and some great ties involving non-English clubs as well. Andy will bring you a preview of all of those during the second half of the next hour of Trans-Europe Express, which you're listening to right now on the mighty, mighty talkSPORT.
What football ground are you thinking of when someone says this?
Really tough place to go.
Difficult place to go.
Such a tough place to go.
It's a tough place to go at the moment.
It was a really difficult place to go, always.
But what are the toughest places to go, really? We've scoured the planet to find out. Forget a cold, wet Tuesday night in Stoke. Try playing in a blizzard 220 miles inside the Arctic Circle at the world's northernmost professional club. When Chelsea lost at Tromsø in Norway in the 97-98 Cup Winners' Cup, a massive snowstorm hit at half-time. These two boys and their brooms were absolutely no match for it. We're staying in Scandinavia for Scotland's toughest away day on a windswept cliff in the Faroe Islands. In Euro 2000 qualifying, Craig Brown's men were taken to fishing village Toftir. Kevin Gallagher called the pitch a cowfield and the wind like Pittodrie on a bad day. The Faroe Islands part-timers equalised in stoppage time, leading to these absolute scenes, and still one of Scotland's most embarrassing results.
Daft little ground, silly game.
But away trips don't come any tougher than a lung-busting schlep up the Andes to face Bolivia in La Paz. But now the Bolivians have taken home advantage to another level. The country's highest city, El Alto, 4,100 metres above sea level. Grass doesn't even grow up here. Bolivia have not lost here yet. The longest unbeaten run in any professional league ever belongs to Red Star Belgrade, or Crvena Zvezda if you must. They've gone 7 years without defeat at the Rajko Mitic in Serbia's Superliga. Their fans are pretty intimidating as well, but they're not as loud as this mob. Galatasaray's Ali Sami Yen Stadium's officially the loudest in world football. In a derby with Fenerbahce, Galatasaray fans set a Guinness World Record of 131 decibels. That's louder than Motorhead, and pretty tough to carry out your manager's instructions when you can't even hear them. However, our most intimidating away day is in Wales, where cameras can't enter and players can't leave. HMP Prescoed. This prison team was briefly kicked out the Gwent League over concerns about young opposition having to go in there. Now that's a tough place to go.
Early June 1939, Germany, always a tough place to go to.
Yeah, welcome back to the second hour of 3 of tonight's edition of Trans Europe Express. I'm Danny Kelly. With me for the next 2 hours, I'm delighted to say Andy Brassell. Remember, next weekend will be a radio first. Andy is coming to Kelly Towers at the Kilkenny Hills, and we will attempt to make technology work, and but it should be absolutely brilliant. I'm looking forward to it hugely. We won't be in the same room. We're going to have to be in separate rooms. It's going to be very sad. But at least afterwards, we can sit down and have a lovely cup of tea together. Lots to get through in this hour. We're bringing you all the latest from Spain. And we'll be starting to preview the Champions League, which is back this week. We'll have 6 English teams involved in it for the first time ever, and other big matches as well. Andy will bring you the best of all of those. That's all coming up in the next 45 minutes after we've had this.
Mbappé, Mbappé, Mbappé! Sa carrière, le Paris Saint-Germain, Mbappé! Mbappé! Little give and go, Mbappé's in! Oh, it's 2-2! He scored twice in 2 minutes! Tête de Kylian Mbappé. Allez, Kylian!
I'm sorry, Andy. I've just been, my eyes just caught the crawler on the television company coverage of Trans Europe Express tonight, where it says that the front runners to replace Ange Postecoglou at Nottingham Forest are Sean Dyche and Roberto Mancini. Such a lineup of people I could not have imagined being mentioned in the same breath for a top Premier League job, but that's what it says anyway. Andy, Kylian Mbappé, I mean, obviously when you're as brilliant as he is, as important as he is, as culturally significant as he is, his every move gets amplified and examined with great detail. So today he played against Getafe, as we've just been hearing, and we'll talk about his goal and what it means for him. But the run-up to this has been dominated by the usual, oh my God, surely he shouldn't be playing any football at all. He's so precious.
Yes, and of course this is very much a theme of any matches that are near international matches. And of course all matches are near international matches because all matches are near other matches because there are so many matches at the moment. So obviously Kylian Mbappé got a knock, as we discussed last weekend, in an ankle knock in his last La Liga game against Villarreal, in which he scored, of course. That made him have to come off. He opened the scoring for France against Azerbaijan last weekend, got hit on the same ankle, and went off after trying to play through it, which was something that Real Madrid were obviously quite upset about. He came home straight away before the team even went to Iceland for that second game, in which Jean-Philippe Mateta and Christopher Nkunku started in his stead. And so there was all this question over how long is our precious Kylian going to be out for? Well, obviously he played tonight, obviously started and played tonight and was fine. And do you know what? If you had an inch of fitness doubt over a player, would you make him play Getafe? No, you wouldn't. You'd make him do an assault course. You'd make him take part in Series 5 of Ultimate Beastmaster or Ninja Warrior. You wouldn't make him play away at Getafe. So he was obviously fine if they made him play away at Getafe, especially from the start. And he played the whole game. Of course he did, because 10 minutes from the end, having had a couple of near misses and Real Madrid having had tons of efforts, he finally got his goal. It was Arda Güler who unlocked the door. He came on as a substitute. Great through pass from Mbappé, just about onside, slotted it in, and that was a 1-0 win for Real Madrid shortly after Alan Neon, as we said before, of West Bromwich Albion was sent off. That led to a bit of an argument on the touchline, which Jude Bellingham, who was good tonight, I thought, was obviously in the thick of. Him and Jose Bordalas, the how can we put it, unique coach of Getafe, who's been out there ruining Spanish football for many, many years now. He was involved too, escaped with just a caution. And Mbappé scored for the 11th game in a row. And we've talked about how much really of an image boost he's taken in the last little while. And just by doing his job excellently has clearly been part of it. But obviously, for there to be sustainable improvement to his image, France have to win stuff and Real Madrid have to win stuff. And this winner does mean that Real Madrid go into El Clasico next week on top of La Liga.
It does indeed. And, I know this is Mbappé watch, but I know you'll want to mention, because his name went through there, the ever improving and more influential part that Arda Güler seems to be playing for Real Madrid.
Yeah, and I think what was interesting, even though we only had it in small sample size, that we saw that Güler and Jude Bellingham can coexist, with Jude Bellingham still being in advanced positions. Because that was the thing I think was really noticeable about Jude Bellingham starting tonight. Just his second start of the season, of course, after shoulder surgery and after being left out of the England squad. Now, there's been a lot of hot air about Bellingham over the last little while, and his personality and how it might not fit an England team. Well, while we're about it, why don't we talk about vintage France leaving out Zinedine Zidane? Let's have that sort of talk, shall we? Because to me, that's the sort of level of self-harm that would be. The idea of Bellingham having to earn his place back in the team, I don't have an issue with at all. And that's the case for Real Madrid as well as for England. But the idea that England would be going to the World Cup without him for a more harmonious atmosphere, what are we talking about? It's just absolute nonsense. Absolute nonsense.
That's the job of the manager, to manage the harmony within the group. It really is. And the idea that you'd leave out one of your, never mind, I'm thinking about Trent Alexander as well, leaving out these brilliant. They're at Real Madrid for a reason, these lads, aren't they? It's not because they're great fun and everyone gets on with them. They're there because they're great footballers.
No, and they demand to win. These guys demand to win, and I think that's part of it. And look, he is he is a player that I think it's easy to say that he conducts the crowd, he conducts the team when everything's going well, and then to instantly turn around and go, well, maybe he could keep his mouth shut now and then when a team's not winning, or when it's not going well, or when he's not starting games, which has been almost exclusively due to injury, by the way, and his body shape having changed a little bit. And, you know, it's sometimes forgotten that he's still a young player. But I thought what was interesting, as I said, when Arda Güler came on tonight, clearly they're chasing a win. So it's maybe a sort of slightly different view to how it might be in other games, a different approach as to how it might be in other games. But we saw a lot of Jude Bellingham in advanced positions, which is clearly where he's best for England and for Real Madrid. And he was knocked over by an unbelievably bad challenge, actually, from Genet, the centre-back, which led to a free kick from which Mbappé almost opened the scoring just before he actually did. So we've seen some good things from Jude Bellingham in that game.
Yeah, I mean, the issue of where people play for their national team, for Real Madrid, you know, it's always going to be a problem because these are brilliant players and the managers will want to use them. And I guess there was a time when being a versatile footballer was considered a brilliant thing for any squad of players. But in the modern world, that appears to become more and more of a problem for people because managers have such a set idea of what they want to do. And Eduardo Camavinga has been one of those players who has been kind of shifted around the team to do a job, as the phrase goes, when holes appear either for France or for Real Madrid. And I think he's kind of getting a bit fed up with it, Andy.
Yeah, a question on Téléfoot, the French television institution of Sunday mornings, in an interview that was played back this morning, clearly struck a nerve because he was asked about, you know, I think you're meant to say when you're asked how do you feel about playing at left back, oh, I'll do whatever it takes to help the team. He's like, no, I'm not a left back. No, I'm not a left back. I'm a midfielder. That's what I am. And he was quite clear and unequivocal about it. Now, look, we know he's confident. And he always has been, you know, from when he was bossing midfield for Rennes against PSG, from when he was 16 years old. And I guess because he's been around for so long, we look at him still as a young player, and he is, I guess, in, you know, age terms, still a young player. But the fact is, he's been around the block. You know, he's felt like a Real Madrid player since the minute he's been at Real Madrid, despite the fact he signed as a teenager. And there must be a point where you think, now, hang on. Is being a good guy getting me where I want to go? Look, he's happy to stand in, and he's been in situations, particularly situations last season when Real Madrid were all over the place at the back, where he actually looked bad because he was put in a position where he wasn't well supported with the right cast around him, and he was forced into positions where he didn't really want to be. So at some point, I guess you've got to put your foot down and say, look, I deserve to be in midfield. And you know what? I think when you look at Bellingham in a more attacking register, when you look at Franco Mastantuono coming in from River, who's been great so far for Real Madrid, when you look at all of those, really, I think it's clear that they need more defensive midfielders, more players who can go and fetch the ball. And that is something that Camavinga can do really, really well. And of course, they'll always need that cover at left back when Carreras is such an attacking left back.
As you say, Andy, that's 11 games in succession that Mbappé has scored now. I'm going to throw you an unrehearsed curveball, if I may. Kane is in astonishing form, goal after goal after goal, game after game after game. Erling Haaland is a monster just now and scores in virtually every game, international and club level. The same for Kylian Mbappé. Is there something changed in the game that's allowing these, well, the people who play up front on their own now, the way the game is actually configured, are we just lucky to have these three all playing at the same time? Or is there something else happening that I'm not aware of?
Yeah, I think there are diverse reasons why they're doing so well at the moment. I think with Mbappé, it was proper rest and rehab this summer. That's really worked for him. Clearly, it's helped him clear his mind as well as sort his body out, because he played through a lot of little injuries last season. It seems as if going out of the Club World Cup at a relatively early stage has really helped Erling Haaland as well. And he looks trim and ready to go. And as we were talking about Harry Kane earlier, It's the way he's adapted his game and the fact that he's in a far better Bayern Munich team than even he imagined at the start of this season, because, of course, he did have those concerns about whether the squad was beefy enough. And look, maybe it's not. They're playing brilliantly at the moment. Will they still be in March or April?
Well, that of course, is both a question for you, quite right to ask, but also for the football authorities, who are demanding so much of these players as commercial entities rather than sporting figures. That, and you make the point again and again and again, Andy, by the end of the season, we're not seeing the best product because the players are flogged into nubs, if I might use that expression. Listen, thank you very, very much, Nita. I just wanted to get your view on that, because it's rare that you get the three arguably best strikers in the world all in ridiculous form at the same time. Listen, thank you very much indeed for that. Next here on Trans-Europe. Yeah, White and Jordan returns from 10 o'clock tomorrow morning as Simon Jordan and Jim White are joined in the studio by the former Nottingham Forest midfielder and, of course, former manager Martin O'Neill in the studio as they look back on his former club parting ways with Ange Postecoglou at the weekend. That's White and Jordan from 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. Right, having done Mbappé watch, let's look at what everything else has gone on in Spain, Andy. Our headline is Hansi gets the flick from El Clasico, because, of course, the Clasico is coming up. But Hansi Flick, Barcelona's manager, will not be on the touchline.
No, he will not, because in the game against Girona yesterday at Montjuic, he got a red card in stoppage time. Now, he got a red card for complaining to the fourth official about the paltry amount of stoppage time that he was offering his team to pursue a winner in. So the board came up, I think it was 4 minutes. Flick absolutely lost it. He was given a red card. And with it being, at the time, Barcelona won, Girona won, and Barcelona in the pouring rain, in the elements, looking really, really desperate. He thought, okay, well, I can understand why he's this concerned. Of course, they did make the most of that time, and perhaps the extra delay of their coach sending off to score a winner, scored by Ronald Araujo, the centre-back, who was pushed up front towards the end. Now, it was really interesting because, of course, they had a load of injuries up the front. So you had no Lewandowski, you had no Ferran, you had no Rafinha, who was in the crowd as well. And by this point, Lamine Yamal had gone off as well. Of course, they're still trying to protect him from any sort of recurrence of injury with Champions League games coming up, etc., etc. And so it was Frenkie de Jong, who signed a new contract this week, driving to the byline, pulling it back, and a real striker's finish from Araujo at the near post, which was fantastic. I'm not sure it wasn't undeserved, but it wasn't overwhelmingly deserved, if you know what I mean. It didn't feel like Barcelona were great in the game. They'd taken the lead early on through Pedri, a really nicely put together goal. As soon as I say that 5-letter word, you know that it's a really beautifully put together and very nicely finished goal. And then one of the contenders for goal of the month, at the very least, by Axel Witsel, of all people. Yes, still out there playing for Girona, dumped by 2 successive clubs for being too old. He thought, well, right, well, I'll show you. Scored a bicycle kick away at Barcelona to get an equaliser, which was nearly good enough for a point. When you're 6'4" and built like a brick outhouse, and you're nearly 40, to score a bicycle kick, I would suggest is quite an achievement.
Well, that's my goal of the month in Spain, already sorted out then.
Yeah.
You mentioned the fact that Frenkie de Jong has signed a new contract. Of course, this must have been some interesting negotiation, because Barcelona still owe him a ton of euros.
Yeah, they do. Deferred wages from COVID and from various other financial issues. And it's funny because he's someone who was desperate to move to Barcelona when he went there in 2019, who always has talked about it being his dream, has continued to talk about it as being his dream for playing for Barcelona. And in so many ways, the Barcelona experience must have let him down, because he thought he was joining one of the best teams in the world, and it fell apart pretty quickly. Of course, he's been part of some of Barcelona's worst teams in recent years, certainly when Ronald Koeman was in charge and Xavi took over at the beginning of that, before he converted them into La Liga champions again, of course. And de Jong has had the sort of football education that you wouldn't have expected. You go from Ajax to Barcelona and you think, okay, this is going to be finishing school, make me one of the best players in the world. But if he has become an amazing player, it's because they've been so short at various times that he's played centre-back, number 6, number 8, number 10, everything Harry Kane thought he played yesterday, basically, and a bit of centre forward as well, and a bit of right winger yesterday. And it's funny because de Jong, the way he has been perceived by those fans, the way he's been portrayed by the club, remember he refused to accept that move to Manchester United a couple of years back, is someone who wouldn't let go of his money, when really he wouldn't let go of his dream. You know, I'm sure he could be paid better elsewhere. If he wanted money, just go to Saudi. But he's someone who's dug his heels in and said, it's my dream to play here, and my dream is going to happen. Look, I'm sure he's happy in his personal life. I'm sure he loves living in Barcelona anyway. But considering the way that people have viewed him, has been viewed a little bit like Gareth Bale, I suppose, at the back end of Real Madrid. He's been viewed not by what he's done on the pitch, but what his contract reputedly is. So for them to get to a point where he's signed again, and look, you can say from a Barcelona perspective, some of it is about keeping his value. I've no doubt about that, because I'm sure they'll try and sell him again somewhere down the line when they're short of money. But for him to have reached a point where he's got this extended deal, I think is a just reward for him, because he's been often excellent for them.
Yeah, and speaking of contracts, we should say that Barcelona have let it quietly be known they will not renew Robert Lewandowski's contract when it comes to an end at the end of the season. And I wonder whether that's to make room for Marcus Rashford on a permanent basis. Rashford hit the woodwork twice yesterday, which takes us then to Atletico Madrid, Andy. A 1-0 win against Osasuna. Now, that scoreline will send shivers of memory down anybody who's watched Spanish football for the past 15 years. Simeone 1-0 at home, but not typical 1-0. They are a changed outfit, Atletico.
Big time. And you look at Osasuna, they're one of the toughest teams in the division. They always make it difficult for you, even more at El Sadar. Of course, they were the visitors to the Metropolitano yesterday. Got everyone behind the ball, made it really, really tough for Atletico. But Atletico have changed a lot. So you look at it on paper and it really feels like old Atletico, but it's not. The way they tried to play 1 and 2 touch, the way they tried to pass their way around them, the way they're really patient in doing so. And I think you could argue that the way they are at the moment, maybe it's a different Simeone running the team. Maybe it's Giuliano, because he came on as substitute. He created the winning goal for Thiago Almada, who'd come on as sub himself just a few minutes before his first goal for Atletico Madrid. And funnily enough, having someone with that sort of attacking verve, in some ways, is his father's son. You know, he's someone who never stops talking to the ref or his teammates. You know, he manages his way through the whole game verbally, and he battles and fights really hard, and he's a pain for the opposition. But on the other hand, he's someone who's got that bit of extra flair, and to find his way around the back of the defence, create that goal as he did so brilliantly in a game where it didn't look like Osasuna were given anything and there was no space. I think that really underlines how vital he's become to Atletico. Now, someone who started as a striker in the youth team, became a wide player when he was on loan at Alaves, and now has played right wing back, right wing, all sorts of different spots. And he can get it done. He's almost the union between old Atleti and new Atleti.
Yeah, and also a first goal for one of the players who's turning him into a more interesting attacking team.
Yeah, that's right. Thiago Almada really is brought in because you want that click between him and Julian Alvarez. And we'll see more of that. And, you know, we saw a goal actually disallowed in the first half by one of the other big signings, Alex Baena, was from a Julian Alvarez brilliant reverse pass. It was disallowed because Griezmann was offside. He claimed he wasn't interfering with play, but it was one of a couple of goals we saw this weekend where I guess players who are offside and not interfering with play are kind of taking the mickey. So Griezmann thought he'd body check a defender and pretend he just randomly walked into him. Similar thing happened in Cagliari today against Bologna, and Cagliari had a goal ruled out for the same thing, where a Cagliari attacker body checked the defender when he was in an offside position. He said, "Look, I'm just trying to get out of the way." Come on, we know what you're doing.
I know, and blocking, which has become so important at corners and things like and free kicks. You're right. It's now started to spread to other areas of the pitch as well. Be like the NFL before long, and I'll tell you about our NFL coverage a little later in the programme. My star of the week, Andy, is Mateo Joseph. Leeds fans will know him very well. He's on loan at Mallorca from Leeds United. Seville's revival, if that's what it came to a crashing end when they got beaten at home 3-1 by Mallorca. Mateo came on and scored twice in that game. Now, he was born in Spain, and here's the lovely bit. He has English and Barbadian forebears, and his dad is a cousin of Emil Heskey's. So Mateo, who did so well in that game against Seville, is related to Emil Heskey, though he probably hasn't quite got such an exotic middle name as Emil. Don't forget that it is Ivanhoe. I know that that's a hoary old sore, but really, one should never forget that when you see Emil on the television doing his thing, that his parents saw fit to name him Ivanhoe. Who's your star of the week in Spain, Andy?
I've gone for Anthony, who Manchester United fans might not.
Every week you go for Anthony now.
Yeah, I think it's a given. Him and Gio Simeone are first on my list. I'm not sure if I've got permission from Tim to do that, but Villarreal were 2-0 up against Betis yesterday, cruising and playing really well. Anthony got involved, hadn't scored a La Liga goal since signing permanently from Manchester United, but he got two great finishes to send Betis home south with a point.
Listen, thank you very much indeed for that. We've had the international break. We've had the club matches this weekend all over the continent. And this week, the proper return of European football, if I may say that, because all three tournaments are happening this week, Monday and Tuesday for the Champions League, Tuesday and Wednesday for the Champions League. What are you saying, Danny? And Thursday for the Europa League and for the conference. We'll start our previews of all those right now, and Andy will take us through the big games in the Champions League, including, as I say, 6 involving English clubs. That's next here on Trans-Europe Express. Okay then, want the chance to play to win up to £100,000? Then listen up, it's our biggest cash prize yet, and we're going all out. That's right, a massive £100,000 completely tax-free could be yours if you're the lucky winner. If you're the lucky winner who gets picked to come to talkSPORT Towers in London on the 13th of November 2025 for a chance to win that huge cash prize. Listen now to find out how to enter.
18 plus UK excluding Northern Ireland. For a chance to win, text the word cash to 83338 and you're in the draw. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You must have the bill payer's permission, or you can enter for free by calling 0330 880 3338. All entries must be received by the 6th of November at 4 p.m. This is a talkSPORT limited promotion run on talkSPORT, Talk and Virgin Radio UK stations. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
Yeah, what a fantastic competition. You can win a massive amount of money tax-free. Downside, you have to come to talkSPORT to get it. I'm sure that's supposed to be part of the positive part of the prize. Don't worry, I won't be there. So it is probably going to be a brilliant, brilliant prize. Andy, the Champions League is back, and we can hardly fit in this 15-minute section the big matches involving clubs from England because of that extraordinary set of circumstances that allowed us to have a sextet of teams in this stage of the competition. But let's start with a very attractive one. Maybe not as attractive for Atletico Madrid, given the kind of form that Arsenal are in, but Atletico come to North London.
Yeah, they do. And I think really it depends what part of Atletico we're getting, because I think if we go back to the game against Liverpool, they were really close to getting what would have been a great sort of season-affirming result when they came back from 2-0 down, and then managed to lose it to an unbelievably simple goal, which I think would have had Simeone biting his lip thinking, yeah, my team of 2013, 2014 wouldn't have done this. But of course, as we said in the previous section, they've evolved a lot since. I guess we're expecting a way different game to the one we would have before. And I think the way that they managed the lineup yesterday against Osasuna is quite interesting, bearing in mind what they'll probably need out of this. Now, where they really came short in that opening game against Liverpool, in the opening part of that opening game against Liverpool, was physically. And this is something that we see often when we see teams of really good standing play the best Premier League teams, that they're incredibly physically strong, even more so, even beyond the cliche, I think.
No, Andy, I think you're hitting on something that I've been writing about. In the last 18 months, the Premier League has replaced either the Championship or Ligue as the most physical league in world football. The size of the players that are being brought in now, and it's no coincidence that the two biggest teams, Arsenal and Liverpool, are the two best teams. Liverpool we'll get round to in a minute. The Premier League, as well as the technical ability and all the rest of it, you now have to confront a kind of land of the giants scenario in front of you. So it's no surprise what you're saying to me, because I've been watching it happen over the last 18 months, really.
So, Danny, if you think about it, the players that they had on the bench yesterday, Atletico, that came on, which to me implies that they will probably start at the Emirates, Conor Gallagher, Alex Sorloth, that mountain of a centre forward, Giuliano Simeone, who we know can run 180 minutes in 90, who we talked about at some length before.
Yeah, they've saved their athletes for this game, knowing what's coming.
Exactly, they have.
Yeah. Another fantastic game, and particularly with so much riding on it now. Liverpool, all-conquering, all-powerful Liverpool of last season, went out and spent, and their fans will be sick of people saying it, £400 million during a close season. It hasn't yet gelled. 4 defeats on the spin. I think it's unthinkable that 4 defeats on the spin for a team that talented. And they go to Eintracht Frankfurt.
Yeah, they do. And Eintracht Frankfurt, for me, as I've said, really since the start of the season, I think they've the quality to be the next best team that are not Bayern in the Bundesliga. On one hand, I think it's a less than exceptional crop. On the other hand, I do think that they are producers of such good young players, and they have a good enough squad that they really could get there. But we're seeing this season what's affecting Eintracht, a little bit like Liverpool on a smaller scale, is the sort of expectation that is quite difficult to deal with. So we've seen that. They had a great opening night in the Champions League when they won 5-1 against Galatasaray. And of course, they have an amazing atmosphere at home when they're at the Deutsche Bank Park. But having said that, they went and got absolutely thrashed by Atletico last time out. They've had a bit of a hiding off Bayern just before the international break. They couldn't quite get the game won at Mainz today. Look, in terms of their attacking quality, there's absolutely no doubting them. And I think given that atmosphere, given that they'll have a proper go at Liverpool and they've got the speed and the wit to do it. You look at Can Uzun, who's been absolutely brilliant so far this season, and a number of other players around him. They've got the opportunity to do something, especially with that atmosphere in the first 20 minutes. But if Liverpool can see themselves through that, it is to me a game they should win, and a game where they should get themselves back on track, because simply they have that little bit more experience, and that is what has let Eintracht down to this point so far this season, that they've played much better than the results would suggest.
The appointment of Jose Mourinho as their manager means that every visit from Benfica, which is already a big deal, of course, one of the great clubs of European football, has a certain new spicy flavour to it as well. I've got to be honest, Andy, I thought he was a bit modest when he came back to Chelsea, a little bit sort of dewy-eyed about the whole thing. I dare say we'll see something more like the real Mourinho when he goes to Newcastle.
Maybe.
You know what I mean, don't you? It was all kind of, I loved it here and all the rest of it. I suspect we'll see something more like the real thing when he goes to the northeast.
I don't know about that yet. I don't think they're in the position to do that yet, because I don't think Benfica is strong enough to be that yet. I think he has to be relatively modest in terms of his approach and his expectations at this point, because, as we say, he's taken over a set of players who've played loads more games than any other comparable European team at this point of the season, and are knackered. They're absolutely knackered. So he's had to find a different way of playing. Now, look, I know you're going to say Mourinho wants to play defensively, and he's found the one cultural context in which it's acceptable to get Benfica to play relatively defensive football, because they haven't got the energy to really surge at teams. Now, they shuffled in the Cup at Chaves on Friday night, and a couple of goals from Pavlidis, who's going to be massively important for them, because if they're not going to create much, to have someone who's a proven Champions League goalscorer who can stick it in the back of the net, I think is going to be really important. But when you look at that physical load on Benfica and how he's having to adjust to get them to cope with that, to cope with the fact that they're not really going to be able to go after teams in the last 20 minutes. You know, when they played at Chelsea, I thought they defended quite well. They kept the shape quite well, give or take one goal, obviously. But you were hoping for them, from a neutral perspective, in terms of making a game, for them to mount something in the last 20 minutes. They just didn't have it in the tank. Now, I think we talked about the physical aspect of Arsenal versus Atleti. I think this is even more pronounced when it comes to Newcastle versus Benfica, because Benfica don't have that much in the tank. And the way that Newcastle go at teams at St James's Park, and they're so energetic in midfield, I think for Benfica, it really is about getting through the first half. If they can make it difficult, if they can quieten the crowd, and if they can just hang on and not be physically pummeled in that first part of the game, then they can give themselves a chance. But they have to get through the first half hour relatively unscathed to give themselves a chance in this. And remember, there's loads of pressure on Benfica because they've lost those first two games. I know you can say it was an honourable performance at Chelsea if you want, but look, they still ended up with nothing. The defeat against Qarabag finished Bruno Lage, and that was an embarrassment for the club. If they're to start looking towards getting in the top 24, they have to win this.
Yeah, I love Newcastle's midfield. Just very quickly run through the other English teams. Villarreal are at home to Manchester City. They'll have to deal with the power that Erling Haaland is currently playing with. Monaco have injuries galore and no No Eric Dyer, so there's no Eric
Call
Dyer
it off.
Derby.
Call it off.
And I wouldn't play it until Eric is ready to play against Spurs.
Exactly.
And Chelsea against Ajax is interesting. We'll talk about it a little later on when we get around to the Netherlands, because Ajax must be, if not on the brink of sacking their manager, they must certainly be fingering the Rolodex for somebody who might replace him the way they're playing. And I'm sorry for using the phrase fingering the Rolodex before midnight, but that's just what happens here on Trans-Europe Express, where next we'll turn our attention to the other big games in the Champions League, including one or two really stupendously juicy ties. Yeah, Andy and everybody listening, of course we love you listening. Just a few minutes to go through some of the ties in the Champions League coming up that don't involve English clubs. Let me while I'm at it, before I forget, tell you about our coverage of the Champions League here on talkSPORT, your home of live football. On Tuesday, we've got two games for you here on talkSPORT. The 8 o'clock kickoff between Newcastle and Benfica, delicious. While over on talkSPORT 2, you can hear Villarreal against Manchester City. And on Wednesday, here on talkSPORT, Frankfurt against Liverpool in the Champions League as well. And the other game that we've got over on talkSPORT 2 is Monaco against the mighty Spurs. But some big games, Andy, lying around that don't involve the English teams. None bigger, I think, than Real Madrid taking on Juventus.
Yeah, it's huge. And it's huge for a couple of reasons, I suppose. The fact that Real Madrid, in their previous game at the Bernabeu in the Champions League this season, were really disappointing against Marseille. They're very fortunate to get through that with a win. Of course, 6 points out of 6 after the win at Kairat Almaty in the last round. Be interesting, as we said before, to see how long that Kylian and Mbappé can keep this scoring streak going. Be interesting to see Jude Bellingham start a game in the Champions League for the first time this season. And it's a game of prestige that really matters to Juventus. As we said, Igor Tudor with Lorenzo Bertoni, we were saying earlier, under a lot of pressure at the moment, especially as he can't get his team to score with all those attacking players. Now, he was asked again, actually, after the game that they lost at Como today, would you consider moving to 2 up front? He said, well, look, no team in the world can support 2 up front. And I thought, really? Because to me, it feels like more and more teams are playing 2 up front and they're rejigging their midfield. It doesn't reflect on him brilliantly, that. So the fact that Jonathan David hasn't scored since 24th of August, Lois Openda hasn't scored at all and is just surfing the bench at the moment. And Vlahovic, despite being the guy who scores the goals, is going to leave at the end of the season, so is starting on the bench. Now, it had been speculated over the international break that maybe they would start Vlahovic and David together. That didn't happen. And Igor Tudor seems to be suggesting that you can't fit them in the same team and you only have to have one centre forward. Now, you know, that level of tactical inflexibility, I think, is quite self-harming. So how that will work away at Real Madrid. And Real Madrid do still, despite having kept a clean sheet tonight and having kept a lot of clean sheets this season, have a bit of defensive vulnerability and have a few players out injured at the moment. I think Juventus have to go and have a go.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Paris Saint-Germain made a poor start to this tournament last year, then accelerated through the spring and won the thing. Off to a much better start this time, Andy, and they go to Bayer Leverkusen.
Much, and you know what, we don't know what to expect from Leverkusen at all. Look, we know that PSG are a little bit depleted at the moment. Of course, Kvaratskhelia was only fit enough really to come off the bench in the game against Strasbourg, which we'll talk about later on Friday night. But we're seeing with those injuries the amount of quality young talent that PSG have. Now, Desiree Doué is back. And he played in midfield, actually, in this game, partly due to them being so stretched. So where he plays, I think, will be quite interesting. But Leverkusen really need to get something out of this. And I think particularly when you look at the fact they could have won both games so far, games that they should on paper be winning away to Copenhagen, especially at home to PSV. Though winning in that, and they should have seen it home, and they conceded a really poor equalising goal. They are still finding what they do right, what they do best. But again, some of the restrictions to them at the moment, you know, they've been stretched up front. Christian Kofane has come in and scored a couple of goals, the teenager, and looked really good. He scored again in the Bundesliga this weekend away to Mainz. So, look, it'll be a great atmosphere. And Leverkusen need to have a go. And Kasper Hjulmand can be bold. And this Leverkusen team can be bold. I think there'll be goals in this.
There's an interesting game going to be in another game in Spain. Barcelona will take on Olympiacos, Andy. But whether or not Marinakis will be there to watch his charges depends on whether or not he's finished talking to Sean Dyche down the pub.
Well, that would be the ultimate reveal, wouldn't it? Marco Silva in the exec box, or Roberto Mancini in the exec box, a Montjuic to seal the deal. Could be quite an interesting place to pitch. Olympiacos no longer top of the Greek Super League, mainly because of the defeat they suffered to PAOK just before the international break. The one this weekend with Ayoub El Kaabi, of course, scoring the goals as he always does, propelled them to that first European trophy going back to the season before last. So I'm really interested to see how teams in Europe, if they can start sussing out Hansi Flick's offside trap the way La Liga teams have started sussing out Hansi Flick's offside trap. You know, we know his teams like to play riskily, but, you know, getting caught out by really big teams is one thing. Getting caught out by Girona, as they did a couple of times this weekend, that's something else entirely. And as we said, I think you look at Olympiacos and you think, okay, there's maybe not that danger because you look at the forwards and they're older forwards. So Alcabi's in his 30s. Taremi is, again, a terrific technician, but in his 30s as well. So maybe it's not so grave against Olympiacos, but I'm really interested to see how they approach it.
Yeah, and the final one I'd mention, and we haven't got time for you to get to apply your massive brain to it, is that Antonio Conte's lack of success in the Champions League has become a cliche. He takes his charges of Napoli to Eindhoven to take on PSV. And surely sometime Conte's, brilliance at football management, with all due respect to his time at North London, must take him into the latter parts of the Champions League. We'll see when he does it. And they start, as I say, in Eindhoven again on Thursday. I've already told you the big games we've got for you on the talkSPORT network. Thank you for sticking with us for this first 2 hours of the show. There's still a whole lot still to come, so don't go anywhere else. You're listening to Trans-Europe Express.
What football ground are you thinking of when someone says this?
Really tough place to go.
Difficult place to go.
Such a tough place to go.
It's a tough place to go at the moment.
It was a really difficult place to go, always.
But what are the toughest places to go, really? We've scoured the planet to find out. Forget a cold, wet Tuesday night in Stoke. Try playing in a blizzard 220 miles inside the Arctic Circle at the world's northernmost professional club. When Chelsea lost at Tromsø in Norway in the 97-98 Cup Winners' Cup, a massive snowstorm hit at half-time. These two boys and their brooms were absolutely no match for it. We're staying in Scandinavia for Scotland's toughest away day on a windswept cliff in the Faroe Islands. In Euro 2000 qualifying, Craig Brown's men were taken to fishing village Toftir. Kevin Gallagher called the pitch a cowfield and the wind like Pitodry on a bad day. The Faroe Islands part-timers equalised in stoppage time, leading to these absolute scenes, and still one of Scotland's most embarrassing results.
Daft little ground, silly game.
But away trips don't come any tougher than a lung-busting schlep up the Andes to face Bolivia in La Paz. But now the Bolivians have taken home advantage to another level. The country's highest city, El Alto, 4,100 metres above sea level. Grass doesn't even grow up here. Bolivia have not lost here yet. The longest unbeaten run in any professional league ever belongs to Red Star Belgrade, or Crvena Zvezda if you must. They've gone 7 years without defeat at the Rajko Mitic in Serbia's Superliga. Their fans are pretty intimidating as well, but they're not as loud as this mob. Galatasaray's Ali Sami Yen Stadium's officially the loudest in world football. In a derby with Fenerbahce, Galatasaray fans set a Guinness World Record of 131 decibels. That's louder than Motorhead, and pretty tough to carry out your manager's instructions when you can't even hear them. However, our most intimidating away day is in Wales, where cameras can't enter and players can't leave. HMP Prescoed. This prison team was briefly kicked out the Gwent League over concerns about young opposition having to go in there. Now that's a tough place to go.
Early June 1939, Germany, always a tough place to go to.
I know, almost impossible to believe that it's been 2 hours of Trans-Europe Express and there's only 1 hour yet to go, but that is where we're at, everybody. So listen up for the next 60 minutes and you'll have enjoyed the entire programme. I'm Danny Kelly. With me tonight, as always, Andy Brassell. So much more to get through in this next 55 minutes or so. We'll be talking about what's happening in France. We'll have the Europa League and Conference League. So many games, we can't preview them all. We'll pick out some of the ones that are the most juicy looking ties. Then Andy will take you around the leagues at the end of it, where we're still not quite there. There's still 24 hours to go before we can announce not just new champions of Sweden, but first time ever champions of Sweden. What a story that is, and we'll do it next week, because the population of the town where the new champions were coming from is 1,500. It's not even a hamlet. It's not even a sort of garage stop on the highway. That's coming up in the next 50-odd minutes here on Trans-Europe Express, where you're listening to me and Danny Kelly, and him, Andy Brassell. And of course, this last hour of the show would not be its normal self until we'd connected the bits of strings and tin cups across the Atlantic to join Tim Vickery in South America. Hello, Tim.
Evening, gentlemen. How you doing? Are those tin cans and the tin, is it working all right? Can you hear me, Major Tom?
Well, you're L&C, my friend, L&C. I just wonder whether kids don't read comics anymore, so making telephones out of cans and strings may well be, sigh, a thing of the past. Okay, Tim, let's start with last Tuesday saw the end of the FIFA dates for South American teams. I suppose the most obvious thing, having praised Brazil to the rafters for their thrashing of South Korea, I noted they lost to Japan.
They did, after being 2-0 up at half-time. They lost 3-2 A number of things to bring into contention here. One is Japan, and we saw this in the World Cup when they beat Germany and Spain. I'd never seen anything like it. You know, for so long we've been thinking of football as control of the game and domination of midfield. And Japan in these games, they're quite happy to sit back for a while, and it's almost like without making a change, they just flick a switch. And, you know, suddenly they charge forward and they're irresistible for 10 minutes. They beat Germany like that, they beat Spain like that, and they beat Brazil like that. It was 3 goals in 19 second-half minutes. Ancelotti won't be too alarmed because he had very much a reserve defence out there. And there's a few names in there who didn't do themselves any favours, especially, I think, some of the players who are based in Brazil. And also Lucas Beraldo of Paris Saint-Germain, who Ancelotti likes a lot. I think because he sees him as someone who can cover the left-back position as well. But really wasn't particularly good as the left-sided centre-back. So losing, I think it comes across as a little bit of a warning of complacency and so on. But also all of this, it helps Ancelotti put his old-fashioned pencil through a few names and whittle down the squad for the World Cup. And I think one thing that we know very much after this game is that Alisson is even more than we thought Brazil's #1 goalkeeper, and Marquinhos and Gabriel Magalhães are even more than we thought Brazil's first-choice centre-backs.
Talking of the future, Tim, the under-20 World Cup final is just about to kick off between Argentina and Morocco. Now, Argentina thinking a lot about the future. They're thinking post-Messi, of course, and we seem to be talking on a weekly basis about that Atletico connect between Julian Alvarez and Thiago Almada. But what about this Argentina generation? How much can we take, given that some of the best players haven't been released from their clubs? Of course, it's not obligatory for the clubs to do so. How much can we glean from this, and particularly against Morocco in the final, given that Moroccan football has spent a fortune on youth development in the last decade or so?
I probably think we can't glean too much in terms of the future of the senior national side for Argentina, for the very reason that you mentioned, the number of players not present. And 2 years ago, Uruguay won this competition. Looked like a very good team. Not one of those players has kicked on. Not one of them. And the idea was, this is 2 years ago now, a lot of that team would be immediately fast-tracked into the senior squad. And a lot have fallen by the wayside. Not one of them has kicked on. So the fact that the way that football has changed, better pitches, more protection for talent, means that so many good players, outstanding players in the club game now are 18, 19 and simply not being released. So the Under-20 World Cup has become a competition for this random amalgamation of players who you can get there. There are some promising ones there, but I think probably the most promising name is that of the coach, Diego Placente, who looks very, very impressive and really calm as well. And I think he's a name coming out of this competition to look for. There are others, little central midfielder Delgado, little man, big heart there in the central midfield. A striker who's just joined Inter Miami, Silvetti. Matteo Silvetti looks very, very interesting. And one player, and this is the way that tournaments can happen, who has been on a little bit of a downer, was seen as the big hope a couple of years ago, Gianluca Prestiani, went to Benfica. The fact that he's been released shows that he really hasn't come on with Benfica. I don't think he's even got on the field for them. And he started this competition as a reserve. But injuries to other players mean that he's had his chance and he's taken it really, really well. So it's a little bit of the kind of Salvador Schillaci effect with him. So that's a career that I think needs to be watched. But the one absolute class act so far, I think, is the coach, Diego Placente, who I think is going places.
Okay, well, back at club level, we're into, I mean, there's so much football going on at the moment. I suppose that we started the programme by saying there's so much football going on all the time everywhere. But this week also sees the semi-finals of the Copa Libertadores.
Yeah, the first legs. And it's 2 games where the away sides, I think, will be looking for damage limitation. The favourites here very much are the 2 Brazilian heavyweights, Flamengo and Palmeiras, who've just met today in the Brazilian League. And Flamengo won that one 3-2. In what they'll hope will be a dress rehearsal for the final. Flamengo are at home to Racing of Argentina. and Palmeiras are away at altitude to Liga of Quito, or LDU. So both Racing and Palmeiras at altitude will be playing a game here of damage limitation. Racing is quite a good story, I think, and their coach especially, Gustavo Costas, who back in the day, he was a mascot when he was about 4. He was a player when they won an international title in the late 80s. He was a defender. He's gone on and had a coaching career. When he came back, his third spell as Racing coach, he said, we're going to win more international titles. They won last year the Europa League equivalent. They won the Super Cup. Now they're going for the big one, the Libertadores. And Gustavo Costas, he's more of a supporter than he is a coach. Quite often I don't like watching coaches celebrate goals. I don't think it's their function. Yeah, supporters celebrate goals, players do, coaches coach, and you want them to focus. It's the time. It's a dangerous time. You've just conceded. You've just scored a goal.
Yes, you want to do what proper coaches do when the players are all going mad. Is they look out at the pitch and tap the side of their head to say,
exactly.
Yeah, concentrate now. We're into the dangerous 5 minutes after we've scored.
Indeed. Costas with Racing, he doesn't do any of that. He races around like a madman, but it's genuine. And he says himself that many a time he would much rather be up in the stands celebrating than there on the touchline. And we will see. And what he'll try and do, his Racing side will try and waste as much time as possible to try and give themselves a shout there in 10 days' time in front of their own supporters. And Palmeiras will probably do something similar away at the altitude. If they've lost by 1 goal, or if it's level or anything better, that they will consider themselves strong favourites. So it looks as if we're building towards a final of the big one, Flamengo against Palmeiras. But we will see what Racing away and Liga of Quito at home can do to spring something of a surprise. And if Racing do it, my God, there's going to be some celebrating. Gustavo Costas will hurl himself into the arms of his beloved support.
Now, Tim, we're always talking about Palmeiras and Abel, their Portuguese coach. I want to bend your ear about another Portuguese coach, because of course Palmeiras in the mix for the title domestically in Brazil, and so are Cruzeiro. They're in 3rd place at the moment under Leonardo Jardim, who's had such an interesting career. He started out as a handball coach when he was at university before moving into football in his late 20s. Did a great job at Sporting, built that brilliant Monaco team that won the title in 2017 with Mbappé and Bernardo Silva and all those, took them to the semi-finals of the Champions League, went a little bit awry in Europe and ended up in the Middle East. And now he's one of these other Portuguese coaches in Brazil. How's he doing, and how are people reacting to him?
He's doing sensationally well, and as long as his team does well on the pitch, he can behave as he likes. There's another, actually, the fellow who's coach of Di Maria, Rosario Central in Argentina, Ariel Holan. He began as a field hockey coach and moved into football relatively late. But yeah, Leonardo Jardim, he walked into a difficult situation because Cruzeiro, they'd made some big money, big name signings. And you looked at these signings and think they're not going to work. They're playing to the gallery. And Jardim came in and he had a look at these big name signings. And he said, you know what? I'm not going to play them. I'm not going to pick them. That was he used up his capital there early, and it worked. So he then freed himself from the necessity of playing these signings. And his team have done really, really well. And they're still in contention for the title, which wasn't really expected at all. And he says how happy he is with his team, while looking in that distinctly Portuguese way, not happy at all, looking as grumpy as he could possibly be. But he is finding it a strain, the Brazilian calendar and so on. Just the sheer... And for example, we've just been talking about the FIFA dates. We've already had 2 rounds of games since the FIFA dates. 2 rounds of games since the FIFA days.
Wow.
It's absurd. And you put that in a country the size of Brazil with all the travelling. So he's already said he's not going to coach any other Brazilian clubs. So I don't think he's going to be here for very long. But he's done really, really well. And the secret was that bloody-minded independence. He more or less said to the club directors, your big money, media hype signings, I'm not going to bother with them. I'm going to build my team. He's still in with a chance of winning the Brazilian Cup, which plays really big over here, and they've got an outside chance of winning the league title. So the team that he's built is a very good one, a very, very impressive one. So he's done very well, but I don't think we're going to see him here forever.
And Tim, that's the latter stages of the Libertadores. The female equivalent is even furthermore advanced.
Yeah, it's all wrapped up now. It's played on a tournament basis. Because people haven't got the money, it is alleged, to crisscross the continent. So you get them together once a year on a tournament basis. This year it was in Argentina. And it's happened every year since 2009. Only 3 times has it not been won by Brazilian sides. And they were all in the early years before Brazil had really got itself organised. We've had another Brazilian victory this year. Again, it's Corinthians, who are the outstanding force in Brazilian and South American women's football. But the interesting thing here, and I don't really know what the explanation was, we almost had 3 Brazilians in the last 4. So it looks like total domination. But the results, they had it much, much harder. Apart from one game, where Corinthians beat a team from Bolivia called Always Ready. They beat them 11-0. Imagine if Always Ready hadn't been ready for that game. We'd have been talking about a cricket score. The score lines were much, much tighter. And of the 6 games that they played, Corinthians, to win the title, they only actually won 3. They got held by a draw by an Ecuadorian side in the group phase. The semi-final was against fellow opposition, Brazilian opposition. That was a draw and penalties. And the final, Deportivo Cali, that was 0-0 and penalties, and they came through a penalty shootout. So somehow, and I don't really know why, I don't really know how to explain this, because this was across the board with the Brazilian teams. They were coming out on top, but they were being pushed much, much closer by opposition from Ecuador, from Colombia, and from Chile. So that, I think, is good news for the women's game, because it's developing in Brazil, and surprisingly, to my mind, even though it's developing in Brazil, the rest of the continent pushed them much closer this year.
Tim, as always, absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much indeed. Tim Vickery there with all the latest, and what a lot of news there was from South America. Next, we'll look at France here on Trans-Europe Express. Yeah, listen, there's NFL action later this morning where you can listen to the Atlanta Falcons at the San Francisco 49ers live here, or live on talkSPORT 2 after our show from just after 1 o'clock in the morning. That's live NFL on talkSPORT 2 from just after 1 a.m. Now, football in France, and Andy's chosen headline is Panikele on the streets of Paris, which requires you A, to understand the oeuvre of the Smiths, and B, not to confuse Panikele with Danny Kelly. You're talking about Strasbourg's informed striker Joachim Panikele. Tell me why, Andy.
I am. Well, because Liam Rosenior gave him the most glowing testimonial after a game that I think I've heard a coach do for a player this season. So Strasbourg went to PSG on Friday night, and it was, I think, a game of the season in France. It was brilliant. PSG took the lead. Strasbourg came back and then some, led 3-1 with 2 goals from Panikele, who's now the top scorer, by the way, in Liga with 7 goals so far this season, having come across from Alaves in the summer quite unheralded. PSG came back and drew 3-3, as you would kind of expect. But Strasbourg were great because so few teams go to the Parc des Princes and have a proper go, and they had a proper go. Panikele was a huge part of that. Now, Rosenior said afterwards that the equalising header, which Panikele scored, was the best centre-forward's header that he'd seen in real life. It was the best number 9's performance that he'd seen in real life as well, which I think is a pretty glowing testimonial. Now, it's interesting because, of course, we go back a couple of weeks and, of course, there's this thing that continually comes up, the blue coat ownership of Strasbourg, and some of their fans very unhappy with it. Very unhappy, of course, that Emmanuel Omega, having recently been made captain, was then announced as being sold to Chelsea for next season. Now, Omega has been back briefly since then and then been injured and out the most of the time. But it hasn't mattered because Panikele has been absolutely fantastic. Now, as Rosenior was pointing out, his dad was a centre forward as well. He's now an author, but he was a forward for River Plate as well, and he thinks that's helped. But honestly, to come over from being a bit part player in Spain to one of the leading men in Liga is really impressive.
Yeah, interesting too that he hasn't been capped by Argentina, and I guess by residence. Now he probably qualified for Spain as well. I don't know that, but it's just an interesting fact that he hasn't been capped at any level by Argentina, despite being, according to Liam, the best centre forward he's ever seen. Very, very interesting indeed. To talk about another footballer whose controversial career, his controversial actions off the pitch has cast a shadow over his career, I want to talk about Mason Greenwood. Now, let's get this right. Mason Greenwood has done some pretty awful things, and you are entitled to your view about him as a human being. So we accept that those things are true about Mason, but he is a professional footballer as well. And this weekend, he did something quite extraordinary, really. He equaled a record. Goes back, Andy, to 1991. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's right. He scored 4 times for Marseille against Le Havre this weekend in a 6-2 victory. The first time that a player has scored 4 times in a game for Marseille since 1991. And that's right, Jean-Pierre Papin. And that's right, that Marseille team. So that's pretty historic. Now, I would say really it's Mason Greenwood's Marseille career in microcosm, really, because on paper, it looks fantastic. On paper, all the statistics look fantastic for Mason Greenwood since he's been there. Now, look, he has clearly had a section of Manchester United fans, particularly online, who, when he was charged and under investigation, were willing to forgive anything because they thought he had the talent to come back and change things for United. Now, a lot of those fans will still look at Greenwood and say, look at the numbers. But I think you have to dig a little bit deeper into it. Now, the penalty from which he equalised, well, whether it was a penalty. Gauthier Lloris, actually, the brother of Hugo Lloris, was sent off for a handball, denying a goal-scoring opportunity. It was not very clear from VAR whether it was in or outside the box. Nevertheless, Le Havre, who were 1-0 up at the time, due to the fact that Greenwood couldn't be bothered tracking back, by the way, they got the penalty. They went down to 10 men, Le Havre, and they equalised. It still took until the 65th minute for Marseille to go 2-1 up in this game, and then there was a flurry. Greenwood scored all of the first 4 goals, and that's the thing. It was brilliant, but really he was getting stuck into one of the worst teams in the division, who were knackered and down to 10 men, and they brought a couple of fast attackers on in Nadir and Robinho Vaz, who's a brilliant young academy product at Marseille, who can really help him by doing a lot of running. So I think you have to look at Greenwood as a whole and say a lot of the actions he's made this season have really underlined the fact that rather than doing what he did before, which was everyone's against him, just get in the bin, my talent is going to speak for me, and that's the end of it. There's been an air of arrogance actually to the way that he's approached his Marseille career, and De Zerbi, who's been one of his biggest defenders, has done his head in at times. He's left him out of big matches, like he took him off at half time in one of the PSG games last season and left him out of the starting lineup for the other one because he just wouldn't defend. Now we've seen this season that Greenwood can do it. He's been really useful off the ball in the game against PSG. He worked really hard in the away game at Real Madrid as well, in which Marseille were excellent. And then he showed up, and the headline is he scored 4 goals, but he didn't pull his weight defensively against a poor team in this. Now, on the other side, you see little parts of how he wants to help. There's been a lot of fuss, of course, about the fact we don't expect him to play for England again, of course, but a lot of people have been expecting him to play Jamaica because he's received a Jamaican passport. And the Jamaican FA are a little bit confused about why he hasn't declared for the squad. Well, actually, some of the West Indian islands have an agreement with France where they don't count as non-EU because of a particular trade relationship. So by accepting this Jamaican passport, he's actually done Marseille a solid, because this means that he doesn't count as a non-EU player anymore. And Igor Paschal, the Brazilian brought over, can fit into the squad. So as always, so much of what Greenwood does is a contradiction, even though when he's playing his best, he's very convincing.
Listen, thank you very much indeed for that. I should just mention that Monaco play Spurs in the Champions League this week. You can hear that game here on the talkSPORT network. I've got their new coach, Seba Pocognoli, in, but it didn't work against Angers, who got a late equaliser in a 1-1 draw. Who's your star of the week in France, Andy?
My star of the week, straight off, has to be Seko Fofana. I love watching him play. Got a goal for Rennes at last today, which looked like it was going to give them victory with Auxerre. Again, they dropped points. One of the real underachieving teams of Ligue 1, and I suspect that Fofana will outlast his coach, Habib Bey.
Yeah, that sounds about right. My stars of the week, and I make no apology, are the fans of Nice. Before their 3-2 victory over Lyon, they decided to rev the players up with a huge tifo in homage of their actual city. And I don't want to say this wouldn't happen in English football. It included quotes from Friedrich Nietzsche. Some pretty high-powered intellectual effort gone into the tifo at Nice, and their fans are my stars of the week. Still heading towards the finishing line a little bit now here on Trans-Europe Express, but lots to get through, including next. Andy will take you through the more interesting ties coming up on Thursday in the Europa and Conference Leagues. Okay, do you want the chance to play to win for up to £100,000? That's then listen up. It's our biggest cash prize yet, and we're going all out. That's right, a massive £100,000 completely tax-free could be yours if you're the lucky winner who gets picked to come to talkSPORT Towers in London on the 13th of November this year for a chance to win that huge cash prize. Listen up to find out now how you can enter.
18 plus, UK excluding Northern Ireland. For a chance to win, text the word cash to 83338 and you're in the draw. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You must have the bill payer's permission, or you can enter for free by calling 0330 880 3338. All entries must be received by the 6th of November at 4 p.m. This is a talkSPORT limited promotion run on talkSPORT, Talk and Virgin Radio UK stations. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
Yeah, welcome back to talkSPORT. I'm Danny Kelly, and Andy, we're now moving on now to the Europa and the Conference Leagues, and I suppose the game that looks most interesting in one way is Nottingham Forest against Porto. Porto have won every game this season, and Nottingham Forest, I think it's fair to say, have not.
Yeah, that's right. And even if there's a difference in resource, Forest are kind of a mess at the moment. They're really organised and really tight in the image of Nuno last season, and that's not the case at the moment. And I don't think we can pin all that on Ange Postecoglou, even though he's paid for it with his job. So especially after being in a position where they should have really seen the game over the line, and what a difference that might have made to Postecoglou in the first game against Betis. And then, of course, they made a bit of a mess of things against Midtjylland in the first home game. You know, the City ground is one of those grounds, like Villa Park elsewhere in the Europa League. We think, what a great place to have European football. You know, I'm going to the game on Thursday. I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be brilliant. But Porto are a tough old nut to crack this season. They've only not won one game, which was the 0-0 draw with Benfica in the Clásico, where Mourinho absolutely Mourinho'd them, and it was a 0-0 draw. But look, they've had a little bit of extra rest because they had their Taça Portugal game on Friday night. They left Samu out the team to give him a bit of rest, and then brought him on for the last half hour, and he scored a hat-trick. But they've got so many options off the bench. André Villas-Boas went out there, the president, and helped Francesco Farioli build a team, brought in a lot of good players this summer. They're versatile, they're young, they play decent football, but Farioli is pretty hard-nosed and knows how to defend as well. So it's not easy at all for Forest, this one.
Yeah, Aston Villa now in fantastic form. I think it's 5 wins on the spin following their victory in North London this afternoon. And they go to the town of Deventer in the Netherlands, who house one of the clubs with perhaps my favourite name in European football, the Go Ahead Eagles.
Yeah, and shame they didn't end up playing Palace, I suppose, really.
Yeah.
You know,
very confusing.
If justice had been served and Crystal Palace had been in this competition, we'd be talking about something a little bit different, perhaps. But Go Ahead Eagles, I saw them play this weekend in their away game at PSV Eindhoven, and that is probably the last game you would want before playing this one against Aston Villa, because they're going to need a lot of energy. You know, that they did miracles really in winning the Dutch Cup, the KNVB back last season, and then off the back of that, of course, lost their coach, Paul Simonis, who went to Wolfsburg, where he's finding it quite difficult. Now, I think where you look at where they are, Go Ahead at the moment, sort of lower mid-table, I suppose, that they've managed to do that and manage a European campaign, which they're clearly not prepared for. You know, really the Conference League was made for clubs like them, and I don't mean that in a patronising way. Of course, they've earned their place in this competition, but it's going to be really tough for them. And they found that in that first home game against the CSB, the artist formerly known as Steaua Bucharest, of course, because they had plenty of that game and didn't get it over the line. They lost in the end. But then they went away and won at Panathinaikos in the last game. So I tend to think it will be easier for them in a row on the road. By the way, what a result that is away at Panathinaikos, showing you can't underestimate them. I thought it was interesting. They were absolutely battered for the first hour at PSV yesterday. And then in the last half hour, they kind of gifted a goal and made it quite tricky for PSV. PSV showed them a lot of respect in that last 20 minutes, which is something you wouldn't necessarily expect from a Peter Bosz team. So I think given what they're dealing with and that is so out of the ordinary, it's admirable how they're juggling it at the moment. Of course, Villa massive favourites, but this is a huge, huge, huge match for them.
We talked glowingly about Stuttgart all season, and of course, even in this edition of Trans Europe Express, big test for them though when they go to Turkey to take on Fenerbahce.
Yeah, it is, and I think you look at Fenerbahce though at the moment and how they've been struggling to win game draws so far this season. Even after Jose Mourinho's gone, Domenico Tedesco now there is the coach. So I quite fancy Stuttgart to go quite in this competition. I really like the look of them. They're versatile. We talked about how adventurous they are and how they're not a team that goes away and gets behind the ball. They're going to have a go. You know, they like to have possession, and quite how that will go down with the crowd at Sukulu Sarakurlu, I think is a really interesting thing to see. Deniz Undav, of course, someone with Turkish heritage. He's fit again, so he's going to be back in the team. So it'll be really interesting to see how they go on.
In the conference, Crystal Palace are home to Larnaca, and even you, Andy, surely has not got an encyclopedic view of how Larnaca might play.
Well, I know a little bit about them. I mean, Palace are enormous favourites, of course, because Larnaca at the moment are fifth in the Cypriot League, which obviously conveys a gulf of some distance. But they've got a coach of note in Imanol Ediakes. So he was the assistant to Unai Emery when he was at Villarreal, and he's now in his fourth spell. He's on his multiple spell at AEK Larnaca, and interestingly, the first time he took the job, he replaced Andoni Iraola, his fellow Basque, who was binned from Larnaca after going on this big winless run in his first managerial job, got fired. Obviously, things have worked out well for him since being fired from a Cypriot League club in his first job. But Idiakis is really interesting. In his last job before coming back to Larnaca, before coming back to Cyprus, he got Deportivo La Coruña promoted from the third tier, which is really hard, by the way, as we've discussed before. Getting out of the Segunda B is super tough. This is another level, of course, completely different. But you know, he's not a stranger to top level football, having worked under Emery.
Andy, your old friends at Shakhtar take on Legia, arguably the most famous club in Poland. But of course, this game is complicated by the fact that it is in Poland itself.
Yeah, they're playing their home games in Krakow this season. Of course, they played some big stadiums in Germany. They played Schalke and Hamburg the last couple of seasons for their home games, scaled down a little bit for Conference League football. But of course, immediately after the full-scale invasion by Russia in 2022, the first place Shakhtar played and the first place that most Ukrainian clubs played was in Poland. So they've got this relationship with Polish football. They actually played in Legia's stadium for those Champions League games. You remember Mykhailo Mudryk getting after Celtic and Real Madrid in those games, memorable games that I was at, and they nearly beat Real Madrid, of course, in the second of those games before a late equaliser by Antonio Rudiger. So for them to be playing again and against Legia, that team, that club that extended the hand of friendship in the first place, is really interesting. So it will almost be like a home game for Legia. But on the other hand, Shakhtar, you look at their quality, saw them at Aberdeen last time out, undoubtedly one of the favourites for this competition. They've got a decent side this season.
Yeah, packed as it used to be with Brazilian footballers.
Yes.
That's a good thing. Andy, I want to leave as much space as I can for Round the Leagues, because we've got a lot to talk about in the world of Mauro Icardi and his ex-wife, Wanda Nara. But let me just, before that, remind you, these are the games you can hear on talkSPORT on Thursday in the Europa League and the Conference League. The 5:45 kickoff over on talkSPORT 2 is Go Ahead Eagles of Deventer against Aston Villa. And then 8 o'clock, Nottingham Forest against Porto is on talkSPORT. And at 8 o'clock as well, Crystal Palace against Ike Larnaca in the Conference League will be over on talkSPORT 2. Heading for the finishing line now here on Trans-Europe Express, but not before Andy has told us everything that's happening in the Netherlands, Portugal, Sweden, and, as I say, the world of Mauro Icardi. That's next. So, Andy, just time for us to go round the leagues now that club football has started in all of the leagues in Europe again. Just coming to an end here, of course, in the Republic of Ireland, which is a summer league. I'll tell you more about that next weekend. Let's start with the Netherlands, Andy. A fantastic win for Feyenoord, a huge win for Feyenoord, and Ajax yet again showing that they're not fit to lace the boots of the Rotterdam club at the moment.
Yeah, that's right. Let alone the great Ajax teams of the past. As you say, the most eye-catching result of the weekend was that 7-0 win for Feyenoord against Heracles Ueda, who's having the season of his life up front. The Japanese striker for Robin van Persie's team getting a hat-trick today, and it was also always set up for Feyenoord to again increase their lead at the top this weekend, because they were the last game. Before that, as we heard, PSV squeaked yesterday past Go Ahead Eagles, but Ajax didn't even manage that against AZ. They were the visitors to Amsterdam. Now, we knew already that there was a lot of pressure on John Heitinga, contributed to Liverpool's championship season last season, but not doing great, really struggling to follow up what Francesco Farioli did last season. And Farioli is someone who, to an extent, divided opinion. He was loved by most Ajax fans because he took them from a mess to competitive, even if the football wasn't perhaps the greatest. Of course, Jordan Henderson was one of his most important players, and it's fair to say, without knocking Jordan Henderson, he wouldn't have been part of some of the greatest Ajax sides, but they were a little bit more functional. But the appreciation they had for him, I think, was clear, and Heitinga has found it's a really tough act to follow. So they lost 2-0 at home to AZ. Second goal scored from the penalty spot by Troy Parrott, former Tottenham striker, Republic of Ireland striker, of course, who's been doing pretty well out there in Eredivisie. And look, they were way off at Ajax. And if you look at later this week, if they were to get a substantial beating at Chelsea, I think that would probably be the end for him. Yeah. I mean, the title already gone. I mean, they're in what, sixth place at the moment? Fourth place, excuse me. Yeah. But 9 points from the top, way off. Like, in terms of quality, they're nowhere near PSV, and in points, they're nowhere near Feyenoord. So where does that leave them, really?
You might not be able to see Feyenoord lose another 9 points in the course of the season. So take your point. Cup weekend in Portugal, Andy, one of your favourite weekends of the season?
Always. So we talked about Benfica earlier and their 2-0 win at Chaves, and a couple of goals from Pavlidis. A hat-trick for Samu, as I said, off the bench at Selo Carenza for Porto, which is really what they needed. I think a nice gentle little stretch of the legs before they get to Nottingham on Thursday night, which would be an interesting challenge for them. And then you had Sporting going to extra time before they had the Champions League game with Marseille this week, which I think is the last thing they wanted. They already had that trip north to Paços de Ferreira. That game went into extra time, eventually won it with an own goal in extra time after Pedro Gonçalves again gave a brilliant performance. The guy who nominally replaced Bruno Fernandes in midfield when he went off to Manchester United. Very different sort of player, Pedro Gonçalves, but a really good goal scorer from midfield in the form of his life at the moment, which makes it all the more surprising that he signed an extended contract to stay at Sporting rather than take a move to La Liga or the Premier League.
Yeah, next we move on to Turkey, Andy. Now, look, I'm going to say we're going to talk first about Leroy Sané, but after that, we're not very prurient, gossipy people. But because Mauro Icardi, Wandanara, etc., put their public life so publicly in social media, I feel we can follow the ins and outs of their complicated relationships, really put no stronger than that, of which there's been a hilarious update on Argentine TV this week. But first, Galatasaray against Besiktas, big game. First goal for Leroy Sané.
Yeah, you're right. Let's get the football out of the way, Danny. So a sort of Istanbul derby, just on the outskirts. They went to Başakşehir this weekend. Now coached by
Başakşehir, yeah.
No, it's okay. Now coached by Nuri Sahin, who of course left Dortmund after that short spell last season. A goal for Eldar Shomurodov, who of course came from Roma to Başakşehir, which was a brief equaliser between two Leroy Sané goals. Now, so many great moments for Galatasaray this season, despite Icardi coming back from injury, despite Victor Osimhen having a few knocks. They've had a great start to the season, only dropped 2 points just before the international break, but got straight back on it. They're 5 points clear at the top of Trabzonspor, 6 clear of Fenerbahce, despite the fact that they sort of squeaked to a win over 10-man Fatih Karagümrük, or one of the other Istanbul satellite clubs today, with Marco Asensio scoring the winner in that. But you're right. Let's get to Mauro Icardi. Icardi, because at the start of the international break, we've talked about this before. How do these guys make use of their international break when they're no longer considered for the international team? Well, let's go back to September. Let's start at the beginning. So at the start of the season, when Mauro Icardi's back fit and he's scoring goals, we see him extending his arms in his pose as he does when he scores the goal, sometimes cups the ears as well. Loves a bit of that. He has his own particular Turkish theme song when he scores as well, which is lovely. People were noticing in the early weeks of the season that he still had Wanda, the name of his ex-wife, tattooed on his left forearm. So what did he do in the September international break? Went to a tattoo artist, got it covered up. Okay, sensible. That's great.
Yeah.
And now we look at this international break, the October international break. Now, at the start of that, Galatasaray board member explained that the current plan was not to extend Icardi's contract at the end of the season. Now, look, this has been overanalyzed in some places because the first line was, at the moment, it is the final season of Icardi at Galatasaray, at which everyone goes, and then he went, as stands, because he's out of contract at the end of the season. Now, of course, they've got such a wage bill, they have to consider whether, given that he's come off an ACL, given that he's 31, that if they want, given that they've got Aussie men, whether they want to extend his contract or whether they could spend the money better elsewhere in the club. Now, look, Icardi has been absolutely iconic since he's gone there, for his personality, for his investment, for the fact that he's scored a ton of goals, for the fact that he was a guy who wasn't over the hill, who wanted to come and sign for Galatasaray and really change the way that people looked at the Turkish Super League a bit. Without Icardi going, Osimhen's not possible, Sané's not possible, I dare say Asensio's not possible at Fenerbahce. So, he's something to prove between now and the end of the season. He's also involved in a sort of truncated custody battle with the kids, with his former wife, Wanda, who, as we know from last year, is the host of Argentina MasterChef. In fact, Mauro Icardi was on Argentinian MasterChef last year. And, you had all these people sort of cooking their teas and trying to impress people, and then stopping and relieving the tension by going, oh, I must say, your husband's ever so charming, isn't he? Because that's just the way it goes in Argentina. Well, this time, who's the special guest? Well, other former husband of Wanda, former best friend of Mauro Icardi, Maxi Lopez, turns up. Now, giving what can only be described as significant side-eye throughout the broadcast.
Yeah, Maxi gave it a look for somebody who was there chained to a radiator. Thank you very much indeed, Andy. Thanks for the last 3 hours. I'll be back tomorrow on H&J. In our poll, you think Harry Kane will be the leading goal scorer in the Champions League this year. Coming up next year on talkSPORT, it's Outspoken with White and Jordan. Till next time, God bless you all and goodbye.